Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. um, Before I start today, just one small thing that some people may be interested in. 1 or 2 days ago, a new book was published, and that is, I had written on my blog, I had written a series of 6 articles with a translation and explanation of Anma Viday. Those articles have now been compiled together into a book. So that book is available on Amazon. I haven't yet had time to put the details of it on my website, but I'll do so within a few days. But if anyone is interested, that book, unfortunately, it's not available in India because Indian Amazon doesn't sell print-on-demand books for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. But in most regions of the world, it is available. And the book is called Anma Viday. I think it's the science of knowing oneself. It's as I say, it's a translation and explanation of Bhagavan's song Anma Vidya. Anma Viday. In Tamil, it's Anma Viday, which is a Tamil form of Atma Vidya. Um, so today I'm going to begin by
Michael, who
um,
publishes it? Who publishes the book?
well, it's published by the Ramana Center in Houston, but they
Well,
publish through Amazon. So it's one well, I think it's Kindle Direct Publishing. The Kindle version isn't yet available, but the hard copy is available. A Kindle copy will become available once all the technical hitches have been sorted out. So it's available, basically, it's available only on Amazon. Um, so, um, coming to today's subject, um, the first question I'm going to answer is one that was sent by email. Um, this was sent to the foundation, um, and this person wrote, I have been watching Michael's Uludu Napadu YouTube playlist. I have a question that I'd like to ask him. Until until verse 27, everything was consistent. But in verse 28, the phrase Pechu mucho adiki kondu seems like prescribing breath control. I know Michael clearly articulates that pranayama is not a necessary part of the practice, but this verse seems to contradict. And the way it's worded in Tamil implies it's to be taken literally, not idiomatically or metaphorically. Maybe it's a preparation before we sit down and practice and not needed in other circumstances or after we progress. Any clarification from Michael would be appreciated. Um, the phrase he's talking about, Pechu mucho adiki kondu, um, uh, Pechu means speech, muchu means breath, adiki kondu means uh, it can be taken as controlling or restraining speech and breath. And the meaning of the whole verses, uh, that is what Bhagavan says in the verses, Erumba Mahande, Erum Idate, Niril Virnda Porul, Kana Vendi, Muruhu Hudal Pol, Kunda Matial, Pechu Muchu Adki Kondu, Ulle Andu Aria Vendum, Ari. What that means is like sinking, wanting to see something that has fallen in water, sinking within, restraining speech and breath by a sharpened mind, it is necessary to know the place where the rising ego rises. No, that is, it ends with a short imperative no. That means know this or no, know the place where I rises. Um, so why does Bhagavan bring in here Pechu Muchu Adki Kondu? Um, restraining speech and breath. Um, well, we can first consider the analogy he gives. He says, like sinking, wanting to see something that has fallen in water. If something has fallen in water, say it's fallen in the bottom of a well and we want to retrieve it, or just when he says um, uh, kana vendi, kana literally means to see. It can also mean to find. So it's in the sense of retrieve. So supposing um, a necklace has fallen in a well, you have to sink in the well in order to find it and bring it back up. When you sink, your main focus is on finding that thing that has fallen in the water. But in order to sink, you have to control your speech and breath. You don't go down. If you go into the water breathing, obviously you're going to breathe in a lungful of water. If you go in talking, obviously you're going to be, your mouth and lungs are going to be filled with water. So naturally, if you dive into water, it's a natural thing to restrain the speech and breath. It's not that you first have to restrain speech and breath and then dive. It's part of the diving process. It's a natural response if you're diving into water. If you're trying to sink into water in order to find something, you naturally will restrain your speech and breath. Similarly with self-investigation, when we try to, Bhagavan says um, we need to sink within, ulle andu. Or so how do we seek within, sink within? We sink within by fixing our attention on ourselves. That's the only way to sink within. Or that if we're practicing self-investigation, that's the only way to sink within. Of course, there are other ways to sink within. We sink within every night when we fall asleep, but we do so because of tiredness. But if we want to know what we actually are, we need to sink within by means of self-attentiveness. In other words, we need to fix our attention on ourselves. What Bhagavan says here, how he says we're to go about it, he says the term he uses is kunda matyal. Kunda means sharpened, and matyal means by a mind, by a sharpened mind. What that implies is by a keenly focused mind. So what should we focus our mind on in order to sink within to know ourselves? Obviously, we have to focus our mind or attention on ourselves. That alone is self-investigation. As Bhagavan says in Nana, for example, in the 16th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan gives a very clear and succinct definition of what is Atma Vichara. He says, Sadakalamum manate atmavil vetiripatikutan atma vicharam endrupaya. What that means literally is the name Atma Vichara is only for always keeping the mind in oneself or on oneself. Keeping the mind on oneself means keeping our attention on ourselves. So the self-investigation is nothing but self-attentiveness, attending to ourselves, that is keeping our mind fixed on ourselves. That is self-investigation. And that is the means by which we are to sink within in order to know ourselves. So when he says kunda matyal, a sharp mind, it implies a mind that is sharply or keenly focused on ourselves. And the order of words, it's very clear. He says, Kunda Matyal, Pechumuchu Adiki Kondu, Ullayandu, Ariyavendum. So there are three sets of verbs here. Pechumuchu Adiki Kondu, restraining the breath, Ullayandu, sinking within, Ariyavendum, it is necessary to know. So how do we restrain the speech and breath? How do we sink within? And how do we know? He makes it very clear, Konda Matial, by means of that sharpened mind. In other words, by means of a keenly focused self-attentiveness, we have to thereby restrain the speech and breath, sink within, and know what we actually are. So what this implies is not that we should turn our attention towards our speech and breath in order to restrain them, but that by focusing our attention on ourselves, we will thereby automatically restrain speech and breath. Because, I mean, in order to speak, we have to be thinking of things other than ourselves. So our attention has to be going outwards in order to speak. So when our attention is keenly focused on ourselves, speech will automatically be restrained. And likewise with the breath. As Bhagavan often pointed out, there is a connection between the breath and the mind. If our mind is much agitated, we will be breathing in a rapid and uneven manner. Whereas if our mind is calm, we will naturally breathe in a calm manner. This principle is what is used in pranayama, to use pranayama as a means to calm down the mind. In this connection, Bhagavan said, to do pranayama correctly in order to restrain the mind takes training. You need to be taught how to do it properly. But Bhagavan said it's not, all that training is not necessary. If you want a simple means to calm the mind, if you simply watch the breathing, when you watch the breathing naturally calms down and the mind calms down along with it. But even that is not necessary because, as Bhagavan also pointed out, the most effective way to quieten the mind, to reduce the mental activity is by focusing our attention on ourselves. Because all mental activity is attention directed towards things other than ourselves. Whereas when we attend to ourselves, that is not a mental activity. That is a cessation of mental activity. Because as Bhagavan explained, for example, in a few verses earlier, in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, what he implies in that verse is the mind or ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without constantly grasping form. What's he mean by grasping form? In that same verse, he describes the ego as a formless phantom, a formless demon. Uruvatra Peya Hande. Pey means a demon. A bit like I think Pey is more or less a Tamil equivalent of the Sanskrit term Pisasha. Pisasha is a certain class of demons who are particularly noted for possessing, taking possession of people. So the reason Bhagavan uses that, this is a demon, this ego is like a demon that has taken possession of this body. But the important thing there, he describes it as uruvatra. It's devoid of form. It's formless. That is, ego has no form of its own. Since it has no form of its own, it's got no separate existence of its own. So it seems to come into existence and to stand, that is to continue to exist and to flourish only by grasping form. The first form it grasps is the form of a body, which it takes to be I. So without grasping a body as I, ego cannot rise. So the rising of ego and the grasping the body as I are simultaneous. And in fact, since the body doesn't exist independent of ego, as he makes clear in verse 26, in which he says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. So the body doesn't exist prior to the rising of ego. So when we rise as ego, we project a body, grasp it as ourself, And without continuing to grasp that body as I, we cannot stand. So when he says, um, urupatri undam, urupatri necum, grasping form it comes into existence, grasping form it stands, that implies without taking the form of a body as ourself, we cannot rise or stand as ego. And having taken the form of a body as ourself, our attention then goes outwards. It goes out through the five senses towards the world. By doing so, we are constantly not only grasping form, but feeding on forms. Here, form means any any object, any phenomenon, anything that is in any way distinguishable from any other thing. So he's obviously not just talking about physical forms. All thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, likes, dislikes, everything are forms of one. Anything that all phenomena are forms, because each phenomena has certain features that distinguishing it from each other phenomenon. So form is here a synonym for phenomenon. So uh, ego cannot rise without projecting and grasping a body as I, and then constantly attending to other forms. But if ego attends to itself, it subsides and dissolves back into its source. That's why he says in the same verse, "Tedinal autum pidicum." If seeking, it takes flight. That means if ego seeks its own reality, it will take flight. That's a metaphorical way of saying it will subside and dissolve back into its source. And so attending to anything other than ourself is a mental activity. So, but if attending to ourself is a cessation of mental activity. So when we attend to ourself, since the activity of the mind subsides to the extent to which we attend to ourself, the breathing will also subside. So when our attention is focused keenly on ourselves, the breathing automatically stops. So what Bhagavan is saying in this verse, he's not saying that we should begin by trying to control our speech and breath. Because if we try to control the speech and breath, our attention is going away from ourselves. We're attending to the speech to make sure we don't say anything, and we're attending to the breathing to make sure we don't to stop the breathing. That is not necessary. All we need to do is to attend to ourselves. If we attend to ourselves, just like if you dive into water, automatically you restrain your speech and breath thereby. Likewise, when we focus our attention on ourselves, we thereby automatically restrain the speech and breath, automatically sink within, and if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will eventually know what we actually are. What we actually are is what Bhagavan refers to here as erumbum ahande erum idate. Erumbum means rising or which rises. So erumbum ahande is the rising ego or the ego which rises. Erum idate means the place in which it rises or the place from which it rises, either way we can take it. Here, Bhagavan uses the word place in a metaphorical sense. It's not literally ego is rising from some place, because time and space come into existence only when we rise as ego. So Bhagavan often uses the word place in a metaphorical sense to mean the source from which we rise. What is the source from which we rise as ego? Only from ourself as we actually are. That is, every morning when we wake from sleep, or if we begin dreaming, from sleep, that is, ego rises from what existed in sleep. What exists in sleep is only ourself as we actually are, only our own being, our being awareness, Satchit. So the rising place of the rising ego is that Satchit, the fundamental awareness of being, I am. That is the rising place. So when he says we have to know that rising place, he means we have to know ourselves as we actually are, which is the source from which we've risen as ego. So all that we do by means of Kondamati, the al is a instrumental case ending. So mati means mind, matial means by mind. Um, Kondamatiya means by a keenly focused mind, a sharpened mind. That's a mind that is keenly focused on ourselves. We need a very acute power of attention in order to know ourselves as we actually are. So by that same keen power of attention with which we seek to know what we actually are, by that keen power of attention, we will thereby restrain the speech and breath without even being aware of it. If we're aware that we've restrained our speech and breath, then our attention has gone away from ourselves towards the speech and breath. So this Pechamucha Adiki Kondu will happen without our even being aware of it. As soon as we notice the breathing has stopped, the breathing will start again because our attention has moved away from ourselves towards the breathing. So we shouldn't attend to the speech or breath at all. All we should attend to is to ourselves. And by attending to ourselves, thereby the speech and breath will automatically be restrained. We will automatically sink within, and thereby we will know what we actually are. So Bhagavan is not suggesting here that we should make a separate effort to restrain the speech and breath. We can completely ignore the speech and breath. All we need to attend to is to attend to ourselves. If we attend to ourselves, our speech and breath will thereby be automatically restrained. This is what happened when when that fear of death came to Bhagavan. In some books, it's put as if Bhagavan enacted death or dramatized death. He didn't do so at all. All he did, he lay down and turned his attention within. By turning his attention within, he thereby automatically restrained his speech and breath. So the breathing stopped and the body became lifeless for a short while. But because it was the destiny of that body to be the vehicle for Bhagavan, to reveal to us this path, the life came back to that body. Bhagavan said it was after about 20 minutes or so, the life came back to the body. But that's incidental. The body is not what's important. But how that is relevant here is Bhagavan didn't sit down and think, I have to enact death, I have to restrain my speech and breath. No, Bhagavan, though he described what happened afterwards in so many words, because in words you have to describe. I mean, when you put things in words, you particularly something very subtle like how Bhagavan turned his attention within. That is actually a process that is beyond thought and beyond words. So no words can adequately capture it. However, Bhagavan did describe it as best as it could be described in words in order to serve to guide us in this path, to show us how we are to turn our attention within. But though he described it in so many words, he himself clearly said, all this happened without any thought at all. Automatically, when that fear of death came, the attention turned within and he merged within. But in order to guide us, he described it in so many words that he lay down and the body became lifeless, and he turned his attention within to see, when this body dies, do I also die? Am I this body, or am I something other than this body? What is it that is shining in this body as I? That's what he was investigating. So his whole attention was fixed only on I. So he merged all the adjuncts but were previously mixed and conflated with I, as I am Venkataraman. I am this body, I am this 16-year-old boy. All these adjuncts dropped off, and the pure I alone remained. In order to experience that pure I, only means is to focus our entire attention on it, to focus our attention on our own being, I am. That is what we have to fix our attention on, and that's how we know what we actually are. So, what Bhagavan says in this verse is actually very, very clear. We just shouldn't, it becomes unclear only if we take it, only if we miss the point that Purnamatiyal comes before any of the verbs. Purnamatiyal precedes Pechamuchatiki Kondu, which in turn precedes Ullayandu, diving within, sinking within, and precedes Aryavendum. So all of these are done simply by a keenly focused mind. What is the mind to be focused on? Just on ourself alone. So I hope this is an adequate answer to that question. This is a very, very important verse. Till this point in Uludunapadu, Bhagavan has repeatedly referred to investigating ourselves. For example, in the previous verse, verse 27, he said that he says investigating what this ego is giving up everything. In the verse before that, verse 25, he says, if sought, it takes flight, or if seeking, it takes flight. That is, if ego seeks its own reality, it takes flight. So like this, he's up to this point, he's been constantly referring to the practice of self-investigation. In this verse, he describes the practice in more detail. How keenly we have to focus our attention on ourselves. So keenly that the speech and breath are thereby automatically restrained, and we automatically sink within and know what we actually are. Likewise, in verse 29, he continues in the same vein, describing the practice. In verse 29, what he says is, Nanendru Vayal Naviladu, not saying I by mouth. That is, there shouldn't be any activity of the speech. There shouldn't even be any activity of the mind. So when he says not saying I by mouth, Vayal literally means by mouth, but it can also mean by words. So it includes even, we shouldn't even think I. We should just focus our attention on what the word I refers to. So Nanendru Vayal Naviladu, without not saying I by mouth. Ul al manatal, by a mind that is sinking within, nan endru engu undum, ena nadale, investigating where it rises as I. That means where the ego rises as I, nadale, jnana nariyam. That alone is the path of knowledge. So what Bhagavan is repeatedly emphasizing, in order to investigate and know what we actually are, we have to keep our attention fixed firmly on ourselves. And then he concludes this verse by saying, Andru idu nan am adu, endru unnal tuneyam adu vichara mama. Besides this practice, or other than this practice, thinking not this, I am that. That means I am not this body, I am that Brahman, is an aid, but is it investigation? When he asks, Adu Vichara Mama, is it investigation? That is a rhetorical question that clearly implies, no, it is not investigation. Investigation is not thinking I am this or I am not that. Self-investigation is fixing our attentions on us, on what the word I refers to, that is, fixing our attention on it so keenly that we thereby sink within. And that is the way to know what we actually are. So in these two verses, Bhagavan is very clearly describing what is the practice of self-investigation. And the practice of self-investigation is nothing other than keeping our attention fixed firmly on ourselves, forgetting speech, breath, ignoring everything else. Just who am I? That's not the question, who am I? We are attending to I in order to see who we actually are, what we actually are. That is self-investigation. So I hope this is a clear answer to that question. I forgot to say at the beginning, because, or I think Chris maybe said, because Shalini couldn't join us today. Any questions you have, if you can put them in the chat box to Chris, he will pass on the questions to me. So, Chris, have any
Yeah,
questions
we've
come
got
in?
6 questions. This is the first of 6 questions.
Okay.
When Sri Ramana was still alive and during daily life at Ramanashram, how would Ramana see, think, and respond to the world in the light of the statement that if the ego does not exist, everything else will not exist? From Ludu Napadu, verse 26. Could you please speak on how this works when Sri Ramana still had a body? Thank you.
Yes, this is a question that Bhagavan was often answered. Bhagavan was often asked, and his answer was very simple. In whose view is Bhagavan active? In whose view is Bhagavan answering questions? It's in our view, not in his view. Because we take ourselves to be a body, we take him to be a body. But he is not that body. He is Brahman itself. That is, the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman, as they say as it's said in the Upanishads. It's not even a matter of becoming. That's just a way of saying it. When we know what we actually are, we remain as we actually are. And what we actually are is Brahman, which is the infinite space of pure awareness. So in the view of Brahman, there is nothing other than itself, because it alone exists. As Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nana, Yathatamai ulladu atma sarupamondre. Yathatamai, Yatat is a Sanskrit word that means real or actual. So Yathatamai means actually or really. Ulladu, what actually exists, Atma Sarupamondre, is only Atma Sarupa. Atma Sarupa means the real nature of oneself. In other words, ourself as we actually are. So what we actually are alone is what actually exists. So there's nothing other than ourself actually exists. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, knowing ourselves is being ourselves, as he says in verse 26 of Upadesh Undiyar. Tanai iritale, tanai aridalam. Knowing, being oneself alone is knowing oneself. That is because what we actually are is pure awareness. Pure awareness, it cannot be an object of awareness. There cannot be another awareness to know pure awareness. Pure awareness alone can know itself. So in order to know pure awareness, we have to be pure awareness. That means we have to cease. We are always pure awareness. We seem to be something other than pure awareness because we've risen as ego. So in order to know ourselves as pure awareness, we need to cease rising as ego. And the means to cease rising as ego is to focus our attention on ourself alone, to focus our attention on ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else. When we cease to be aware of anything else, we're aware only of ourself. And being aware of ourself alone, that is the state of pure awareness. So Bhagavan is that pure awareness. So he never knows anything other than himself. But in our view, Bhagavan seems to be a person, seems to be a body. And that body is answering questions and everything. So it's all only in our view. Because we mistake ourselves to be a body, we mistake him to be a body. If we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know him as he actually is, because he is what we actually are. So then you can ask, if Bhagavan didn't know any of these things, then how was all these answers coming through that body? Bhagavan himself said once when someone asked him, where all the answers come from, Bhagavan said, from the same source from which the questions arise. That is, what we see outwardly in the name and form of Bhagavan is nothing but our own self. Our own self appears outwardly in that name and form in order to tell us to turn within, in order to know ourselves. So it's the actions of what is shining through that body and mind is the pure awareness that we actually are. So the answers and everything else is coming from that pure awareness, but we can fully understand this. We can truly grasp this only when we know what we actually are. When we know what we actually are, it will become very clear. But until then, we are still thinking in terms of dualities. We're still thinking of myself and Bhagavan. That is, Bhagavan appears to us to be a person other than ourselves. But Bhagavan repeatedly emphasized, Guru is not a person. Though Guru may appear in human form, appear to be a person, that is not what Guru actually is. Guru is what is always shining in our heart as I. So if we want to understand the state of Bhagavan, we need to understand our own state. And to understand our own state, we need to know what we actually are. Even to say understand is not adequate because obviously it's beyond understanding. But understanding is a function of the intellect. This is when we know ourselves as we actually are, that alone is knowing Bhagavan as he actually is. Otherwise, so long as we're ignorant of what we actually are, we'll be ignorant of what Bhagavan actually is, because he is what we actually are. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Thank you, Michael. Could I just ask
Yes.
further for clarification?
Yes, certainly.
Obviously I'm not experiencing that state right now, so would it help intellectually to say that some schools say this, that there's the absolute understanding of pure consciousness and absolute understanding, but at the same time there's the relative, that the only way you can work within the world is to have the two at the same time, that relatively, I have to do what I have to do while turning within. So I'm struggling a bit with this, but yeah, I don't get where I'm going.
I think I get what you're saying. That is, so long as we rise as ego, we are looking outwards. So long as we look outwards, we see all this multiplicity. So this multiplicity seems to contradict the truth of Advaita, because the truth of Advaita is there's one only without a second, and we are that. But we see so many things other than ourselves. This is so. The answer given in Advaita philosophy is that all this is vivata. It's all an illusory appearance. What actually exists is only one, namely ourself, and we are now seeing ourselves as all this multiplicity. So long as we see ourselves as this multiplicity, we see ourselves as a small part of this vast multitude of multiple phenomena. And all our actions, when we talk about acting, what is acting? It's the body and mind that are acting. They are a part of that multiplicity. So when we are investigating ourselves, we are trying to step back from this. This is why it is often said in the Advaita Sastras, but we are Sakshi. Sakshi means we are the witness. People misunderstand this teaching and think we have to witness everything. No, that's not the point. The reason it is pointed out that we are the witness is to help us distinguish ourselves from all phenomena. We are not any phenomena. We are not this thinking mind. We are that which is aware of all these things. So this is what is otherwise called Drisya Viveka, distinguishing the seer from the seen, the knower from the known. So all these phenomena of any kind, all our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, everything, all are phenomena. They're all objects, things known by us. We are the subject who, or we, at least now, we seem to be the subject who knows them. So even our body, even our mind, these are objects known by us. Though they seem to us to be I, they're actually something other than ourselves. Because clearly this body is an object. The thoughts, we're aware of the objects, the feelings, the emotions, the likes, the dislikes, all the activity of the intellect, all these are things known by us. So they're all phenomena. So we are the Sakshi, the witness. We are that which knows all these. So why it is said that, not that we should pretend, imagine to ourselves that we are witnessing all these things. Okay, if I am the witness of all these things, then who am I? We need to turn our attention back towards ourselves. So when we are told that we are the witness, we shouldn't be witnessing anything other than ourselves. Our aim should be to witness the witness, to see, to know the knower, to see the seer. In other words, we have to turn our attention back towards ourselves. So yes, so long as our attention is going outwards, all this multiplicity seems to be here. It seems to be very real. And we seem to be a part of this. We seem to be a person within this world of multiplicity. And as a person, we are acting, interacting, all these things are going on. But this is all phenomena that we are experiencing. This is all part of a dream. We are not part of a dream. We are the dreamer. We are the knower of this. But as the dreamer always mistakes itself to be a part of a dream. Because if we didn't mistake ourselves to be a part of this dream, then from what perspective could we witness this dream? It's only from a certain perspective. It's from the perspective of this body. I am this body, this world is out here. If we didn't experience ourselves as located within that dream, we couldn't experience it. So our aim is to turn our attention away from whatever appears. Let anything appear, let it appear or disappear. As Bhagavan says in verse 6 of Arunacha Ashtakam, he ends by saying, after describing how, he begins that verse by saying, there is Undoru Porul, there's one substance, Arivoli, the light of awareness, Ulameni, you, the light of the heart, the light of awareness. That is what the one thing that actually exists. In you, and not other than you, there's a power from which all this appears. And he then he in a very compact way, he alludes to the cinema analogy, but all this is just a projection. But then he concludes that verse by saying, Nindrida sendrida ninevida vindre. Let it appear or let it cease. Let it go on or let it cease. It's not other than you. You there, as he said, made clear in the first line, you is that one reality, one substance, the light of awareness, the heart. So what he implies in that last line, we shouldn't be concerned whether this world appears or disappears. The only thing we should be concerned about is the underlying reality, which is ourself, the light of awareness. So that is what we should attend to. So let the world appear or disappear. Let thoughts come. In Nana, in the 6th paragraph, Bhagavan says, however many thoughts appear, so what? As and when each thought appears, we need to investigate to whom it appears. Investigating to whom it appears means turning our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourselves, the knower of it, the witness of it. So our aim is to constantly attend to a witness, to constantly attend to who knows all this, to whom does all this appear. So we shouldn't be, let the world appear or disappear, let actions go on or let them not go on. That's not our concern. Our concern is, to whom does all this appear? To
So,
me, who am I?
so the job is to attend to the screen and not get caught up with the character that even has these questions.
Exactly, exactly. But when we talk about the screen, we need to be a little careful because the screen is, because we use words and words are always inadequate. So this analogy, the screen means we ourselves are the screen. The screen is not something out there on which this picture is projected. It's
Yes.
all everything is within. We are the screen. Our being, I am, is the screen. That is what we need to attend to. Our own being. So long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, that's duality. So if we want to do non-dual practice, Advaita Abhyasa, it cannot be anything other than self-attentiveness. Because attending to anything other than ourselves, you've got duality. Something that is attending to another thing. So how can attending to anything other than ourselves be a means to know ourselves as the one thing that actually exists? We are perpetuating the appearance of multiplicity so long as we attend to anything other than ourselves. To bring an end to this appearance of multiplicity, we have to attend to ourself alone. That's what I was saying in regard to that verse 28 of Uludu Napadu. If we're attending to the speech and breath, then our attention's going outwards. We can't sink within so long as we're attending to anything outside. In order to sink within, we need to attend to ourselves. If we attend to ourselves, the speech and breath will automatically cease. Everything will cease.
Can I just ask one point which seems subtle to me? When
Yes.
we are doing the attending,
Yes.
is there a possibility that if you're not careful, that could I don't know if this is right. That may even feel I was going to say narcissistic, but that's not the right word. But you have to make sure you're attending to the pure consciousness and not attending to pure ego, I suppose. I'm trying to say something like
Yeah,
that.
I know what you're trying to say. That is, when we, as Bhagavan said, when we attend, when we investigate ourselves, ego is a conflation of chit and jada. That's why it's called chit jada granti. Chit means awareness, jada means what is not aware, and granti means a not. So not is an entanglement of what is aware and what is not aware. What is aware is the pure awareness. The jada element is this body and mind. All the five sheaths are jada. Jada means what is not aware. So we are not investigating anything objective. So we're not investigating the body, we're not investigating the mind, we're not investigating the intellect, we're not investigating the will, we're not investigating our vasanas or anything. We're only investigating ourselves. That means we're attending to the chit aspect of ego. Bhagavan says it very nicely in the passage recorded in Maharsha's Gospel. He explains that ego is chit jada granti, and he says, in your investigation into the source of ahamvriti, ahamvriti means I thought. That's a synonym for ego. It means ego. In your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti, you take the essential chit aspect of ego. Therefore, this will unfailingly lead to that pure awareness that you actually are. Because that is the chit aspect of ego. So it is the very antithesis of selfishness or narcissism. Because narcissism is all about me as a person. I think that I as a person am something special. There's nothing special about this person. This person was born one day and is going to die one day. The person we take ourselves to be is something very, very trivial. What we are attending to is to our own being, to that fundamental awareness I am. And in order to attend to that, to the extent that is, to the extent to which we attend to that extent, ego subsides. So it's the very antithesis of selfishness or narcissism or anything.
I think I'm getting a glimmer, so thank you very much for
Yeah.
taking the time.
Yeah. Well, we're all just getting a glimmer, but this is the direction in which Bhagavan is pointing us. Bhagavan is constantly, if we pay close attention to what he is saying in any of his, in Ulladu Narpadu, in Nana, in Arunachashtakam, in Arunachaksharam Rai, in any of his works, what he's constantly pointing our attention back to ourselves. Even when he talks about Arunachala, though you appear outwardly in the form of a hill, you're ever shining in the heart as I. You're ever dancing in the heart as I, he said. So it's a constant pointing back towards ourselves. Because the whole problem is that we allow our attention to go away from ourselves. Only when we allow our attention to go away from, that is, our attention going away from ourselves and our rising as ego are one and the same thing. So in order to bring an end to this rising of ego, we need to attend to ourself alone. That's why Bhagavan said, you may be the greatest sinner in the world. Give up the thought that you're a sinner. Investigate who you are. If you cling firmly to self-attentiveness, setting aside the thought of what a great sinner you are, you'll certainly be saved. So Bhagavan wasn't concerned about papa and punya, good actions and bad actions. He was concerned about a being. Okay, you're the greatest sinner in the world. Who is it who feels I'm the greatest sinner in the world? Because the being is what is real. Not sin is all about the actions we do. We do actions when we allow our attention to go away from ourselves. Turn your attention back to yourself and see what you actually are. Then you will see that you are eternally pure.
So I'm understanding you're saying go back to your beingness, not to any idea or
Exactly.
thought.
That's what Bhagavan teachings are all about. Bhagavan teachings are not about doing, but about being.
As the title of that book comes to mind, Be As You Are.
Exactly. That's the essence of Bhagavan's teachings. To a simple, uneducated village woman who was a very staunch devotee of his, Akhilandamaya, she's completely uneducated. She didn't know anything. When someone prompted her, today is a full moon day, it's a very auspicious day, you should ask Bhagavan for some upadesha. She came and stood before Bhagavan and she didn't even know how to ask. Bhagavan saw her standing there and asked, what is it? And she said, someone told me I should ask you to say something. Bhagavan simply said to her, Une vidamaliru. That is, be without letting go of yourself. That's the whole of his teaching. All of Ulladu Narpadu, Nana, Shondya, Arunachastuti Panchakam, all are condensed in that simple phrase, be without leaving yourself, be without letting go of yourself. That's all there is to it.
Wow. And of course, as I talk to you now, there's this feeling of almost it's obvious, but then vasanas and things come in, distractions.
Yeah.
And you must just keep coming back, because you know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
100% sure that's going to happen.
We need to understand the nature of vasanas. That is, it's the very nature of ego to have vasanas, because as I was explaining earlier with reference to verse 25 of Ulladu Narpadu, ego cannot, we cannot rise, stand, or flourish as ego without constantly grasping form. That's constantly attending to things other than ourselves. So as ego, we naturally have very strong inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. Everything other than ourselves is what is called Vishaya. Vishaya means objects or phenomena. So Vishaya vasanas are the inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. The vasanas are not ego, but it is the very nature of ego to have vasanas. So the vasanas they are not us, but they're not something other than us. The vasanas have no strength of their own. Whatever strength vasanas seem to have, they derive from us. And how the vasanas gain strength, the more we allow ourselves to be swayed by any particular vasana, the stronger that vasana becomes. Supposing you have some obsessive thought, the more you think of that, the more obsessive you become about that. But there are some people who are pathologically obsessive. They may be pathologically obsessive about cleanliness, or they may have some fear of claustrophobia or agoraphobia or whatever it is. Many people have, if we analyze it, all our thoughts are obsessive. Why do we unnecessarily think of so many things throughout the day? If we carefully observe, most of the thoughts we have, they're completely unnecessary. They have no relation to what we're actually doing at that moment. But we are pathologically obsessed with thinking. Thinking is always about something other than ourselves. So the more we allow our attention to go towards anything other than ourselves, the stronger our Vishaya vasanas become. By attending to ourselves, we are not allowing ourselves to be swayed by those Vishaya vasanas. So the Vishaya vasanas lose their strength. And the opposite of Vishaya vasana is Satvasana. Satvasana is the inclination to attend to our being, and thereby to be as we actually are. So the more we attend to ourselves, the more the love to attend to ourselves will increase, and the liking to attend to other things, that'll diminish. It'll lose its strength. So vasanas are there for all of us. So long as there's ego, there's definitely vasanas. And as Bhagavan said, so long as there are vasanas in the mind, so long this investigation is necessary. And he also said, those vasanas rise in countless numbers like ocean waves. Our whole life, or the entire waking state and dream state, is nothing but a play of Vishaya vasanas. Constantly pulling our attention out toward this or that or the other thing. So that is the battle we're involved with, not allowing ourselves to be swayed by these vasanas, holding on to ourselves, and not allowing ourselves to be distracted by anything else whatsoever.
Michael, we have 8 questions.
Okay, yes.
Queuing up.
Yeah. But anyway, I think it was a useful series of questions.
Yes, yeah, sure.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Right. How to weaken the will? Sometimes my outward going will is so strong that I simply cannot turn within because of the mental agitation and turmoil. During those times, if I try to recite Arunachala Stuti Panchakam to soothe the mind, my mind is still distracted. If I try to read Bhagavan's teachings, it seems like Greek and Latin in those times. It seems I have to catch the mind right before it enters such a mood, and that is why Bhagavan said to annihilate thoughts by vicharana, in the very place, I think he means vichara, the very place from which they arise.
Yeah, vicharana is correct. It's an alternative Sanskrit form of vichara and vicharana both mean the same.
Otherwise they grow into likes, desires, hopes, fears, etc., and then it becomes difficult to deal with them. Is that right?
Yes. That is the only, we all have strong Vishaya vasana. That's the very nature of ego. And the only way to overcome this is by patient and persistent practice. It doesn't matter how many times our attention is drawn outwards towards other things. We have to bring it back to ourselves. And it may seem that this process, we're not getting anywhere. Our mind is still stubbornly going outwards. But if we, Bhagavan has assured us, if we persevere with this practice, we will succeed in the end. So let's not look for immediate results. But Bhagavan said the only sign of progress is perseverance. So long as we're persevering in this practice, we're moving in the right direction. But we all have this. I mean, we're all up against the same thing. Vasanas are strong because we've invested all our strength in them. We have so much liking to experience things outside, even though we constantly learning from experience. But when we attend to other things, it doesn't make us happy. In fact, it just makes us more and more filled with desires. So the only way to overcome this inclination to go outwards is to try to go within more and more and more. Go within means go towards ourselves. Go outwards means go away from ourselves. So we have to, however stubborn these vasanas may seem to be, we have to persevere in trying more and more to attend to ourselves. It may seem hopeless. How can I possibly overcome all these vasanas? Bhagavan refers to that. Rather than giving room to that doubting thought, is it possible to overcome all those vasanas and to be as I actually am, to remain as Swarupa? Without even giving room to such thoughts, it's necessary we need to cling, Swarupa Dhyanate Vidar Pidiyai Pidikavendam. That is, tenaciously, we need to cling to self-attentiveness. It's the only way. And however many times our attention goes outwards, we bring it back again. There's no other way. And this is a measure of our love. That is Bhagavan often said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. Bhakti means love. And the measure of our love is how much we are persevering in trying to hold on to self-attentiveness in spite of all these vasanas that seem to be constantly dragging us outwards. But vasanas, remember, are our own vasanas, our own liking to attend to other things. That is what we call vasanas. And we can overcome them only by not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. By allowing ourselves just to be swayed by just the one precious vasana, the sat vasana, the love to know and to be what we actually are. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Okay. Right, so next one. In practicing self-investigation, the following process seems to be very effective. Can Michael share his opinion on how much it is in line with Bhagavan's teachings, please? In the early stages of practice, attention to the feeling I is a mental activity which takes the form of a thought or perception. As the practice develops, the thought I gives way to a subjectively experienced feeling of I, and when this feeling ceases to connect and identify with thoughts and objects, it completely vanishes. What remains is an experience of being in which the sense of individuality has temporarily ceased to operate. The experience may be intermittent at first, but with repeated practice it becomes easier and easier to reach and maintain. When self-inquiry reaches this level, there is an effortless awareness of being in which individual effort is no longer possible, since the I who makes the effort has temporarily ceased. And then it goes on. It is not self-realization, since the I, thought, periodically asserts itself, but it is the highest level of practice. Repeated experience of this state of being weakens and destroys the various vasanas and which cause the I thought to rise. And when their hold has been sufficiently weakened, the power of the self destroys the residual tendencies so completely that the I thought never rises again. This is the final and irreversible state of self-realization. This practice of self-attention or awareness of the I thought is a gentle technique which bypasses the usual repressive methods of controlling the mind. It is not an exercise in concentration, nor does it aim at suppressing the thoughts. It merely invokes awareness of the source from which the mind springs. The method and goal of self-inquiry is to abide in the source of the mind and to be aware of what one really is by withdrawing attention and interest from what one is not. Thanks.
Generally, yes, but there are some things there. You mentioned that at the beginning it's a mental activity. No, it cannot be a mental activity. To the extent to which we attend to ourself, the I that rose to attend to anything else will subside. So attending to anything other than ourself is a mental activity. Attending to ourself is a cessation of mental activity. When Bhagavan talks about the thought I, the term he uses in Tamil is nanenum enum or nanenum ninevu. That means the thought called I. In Sanskrit, he referred to it as ahambriti, the I thought. But he made it very clear that these are just synonyms for ego. So it is not a thought in the sense of a verbalized thought. It is that is the thought I is that awareness of ourself as I am this body. That is there until that is ego. So ego is not destroyed until the ego will persist until it's destroyed. There are two states in which ego is completely dissolved, completely ceases to exist. Those two states, as Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Upadesha are Laya and Nasa. The difference between Laya and Nasa is that what is dissolved in Laya will rise again. What is dissolved in Nasa will never rise again. So Nasa means annihilation, permanent destruction. So states of like sleep or coma or general anesthesia or Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, these are all states of Manolaya. That is not our aim, because it's very pleasant to be in a state of Manolaya because we're not aware of anything other than ourselves, so we're not troubled by anything. We experience the bliss that is our own real nature. But the mind will surely rise again. So we are not seeking Manolaya. What we are seeking is Manonasa. And to the extent to which we attend to I, to ego, we as ego will subside. There are no two I's to attend to. Many people think you have to attend to ego in order to find some unknown I. There's no unknown I. Ego is nothing but the pure awareness I am, mixed and conflated with adjuncts. So it's an impure version of pure awareness. Let's put it that way. So it's not that there are two I's. There's only one I, and self-investigation from beginning to end is attending to that one I. So we need not complicate it about first you're attending to the I thought, and that's a mental activity, and then that I thought gives way to a feeling of I or something. These are all just words. There's only one awareness I. So long as we attend to anything other than I, that we experience that I mixed and conflated with adjuncts. To the extent to which we attend to that I, the adjuncts drop off and the pure I alone remains. So we have to continue trying to attend to I until we become aware of ourselves as we actually are. When we become aware of ourselves as we actually are, ego, which is of a false awareness, I am this body, is thereby completely annihilated. Effort is necessary till the very end, because the the nature of ego is to have Vishaya Vasanas. Those vasanas will always be inclining us to go outwards. So we can't go within without effort. That we as ego need to make effort in order to hold on to our being. But that just because it's effort doesn't mean it's doing. It is the effort just to be as we are. And the means to be as we are is to hold on to our being. So holding on to our being requires effort, but it is not a doing. So this idea that uh, will sometimes be there'll be no effort. If there's no effort, that probably means we've lulled ourselves into a very pleasant state, but it is not a state of self-attentiveness. Self-attentiveness always requires effort because the vasanas will always resist, that is, ego will always resist attending to itself because it has so much, ego cannot survive without attending to other things. So the more we attend to ourselves, the more we will find the resistance from the vasanas. Vasanas are there all the time. For someone who never takes to this path, never tries to look within, never tries to do meditation of any sort whatsoever, they will be aware of desires. I want this, I like that, and so on. They'll be aware of the likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments, but they'll not be aware of the subtle vasanas from which all these likes and dislikes and desires and attachments arise. So the vasanas are, so long as there's ego, there will always be vasanas. And so long as there are vasanas, we'll be feeling a strong inclination that is, those vasanas are our inclination to attend to other things. So the inclination that inclination to attend to things other than ourselves, it's the very nature of ego. So without effort, we cannot attend to ourselves. People sometimes say, "Oh, I was in for 20 minutes. I was in meditation without any. I wasn't making any effort. I was just in that state of being." If they weren't making any effort to hold on to themselves, then they weren't really in that state. That is, it always requires effort. It's very easy to lull ourselves into a. People say, "For 20 minutes, I had no thoughts." The I that say the 20 minutes is itself a thought. The I that says I had no thoughts for 20 minutes is itself a thought. So just because we may get into a state in which the mental chatter subsides, but we are still not attending to ourselves. Because if we were attending to ourselves, there would be a constant inclination to hold on to something else. It's just like Bhagavan gives the analogy of sinking in order to find something that's in water. In order to sink into water, you need to make effort. Because if you don't make effort, you'll naturally come up for a breath of air. That's why pearl divers, Bhagavan said they have to tie stones to their waist in order to sink down. Because the natural inclination, because we are air-breathing animals. We're not fish, but can breathe in the water. We need air. So we have a natural inclination to come to the surface. So in order to sink down, we have to tie stones to our waist. The stones Bhagavan talks about is vairagya. Vairagya, as he defines in that same paragraph of the 11th paragraph of Nana, he said vairagya is not attending to anything other than ourselves. But vasanas are the inclination to attend to other things. So in order to have that vairagya, we must have great love to know what we actually are. And that requires effort, because otherwise the vasanas will constantly be pulling us up to the surface. So this idea that we can just be in a state where there's no effort, that's we may be in a very pleasant state, but that is not a state of self-attentiveness. Because if it was a state of self-attentiveness, we would be feeling the full effects of the vasanas, which would be pulling our attention outwards.
So the effort is necessary to hold on to ourselves so that
Yes.
the inclination doesn't pull us away.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bhagavan,
much.
there's in Upadesha Manjari, one of the questions Natyanananda asked Bhagavan, whether being still, summa irake, just being, whether that's a state of effort or no effort. And Bhagavan said it's not a state of somber, it's not a state of idleness. It's a state of, it requires the full effort of the mind. He said Puranamurchi or something like that, Murumurchi. So the full effort is required in order to be as we actually are. Of course, once ego is destroyed, then no effort is required. But until ego is destroyed, effort is required just to be. Because the
That makes
natural
sense.
inclination of ego is to rise and go outwards.
And ego is so cunning, it's going to pull you away anyway. So we need more careful.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes,
got
yes, yes.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank you. Thank you.
right.
Okay, so next one, this is from Sanjay Lohia. Michael, I wanted to know the scope of our freedom of action. Supposing I enter my house and I'm hungry, so I go near the fridge and open it to look for some food, but I find that my wife has not left anything for me. Since I'm extremely sleepy, I go to sleep, without eating anything. So it was in my prarabdha to go without food on that particular day. However, what about going to the fridge, opening its door? Could these actions be actions done by me in accordance of my freedom of action? Or even these actions were in accordance with my prarabdha? Thanks.
Someone yesterday wrote a comment on one of my blogs, asking a similar type of question. What I replied was, what Bhagavan has taught us in this regard is actually very, very simple. Everything that we are to experience is God's will, is by God's will, and is therefore what is called prarabdha, fate or destiny. I think how I worded it was, whatever we are to experience is determined by God's will, and is therefore called fate or destiny, prarabdha. Whereas what we want to experience and try to experience is determined by our will. So anything, whatever you want, that is your will, obviously. Whatever you try to experience, whether it's your destiny or not to experience it, the fact you try to experience it, that means you're acting under the sway of your vasanas. Because you were hungry, you opened the fridge. But because it was not your destiny to have food, you were disappointed. We can also say it was also your destiny to open that fridge in order to be disappointed. But it may well have been actually the actions we do are not destiny. Destiny, prarabdha, is what we are to experience. In order to experience what we are destined to experience, certain actions are necessary on our part. So as Bhagavan said in a note wrote in a note to his mother, he said, in accordance with the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that, meaning God or Guru, being there, being in each place, being in the heart of each one of us, Artavipam will cause to dance. So God will make us, our mind, speech, and body, act in such a way, act in accordance with prarabdha. So if a certain prarabdha, if a certain experience is what is allotted for us, some action on our part may be necessary. That action will be made to do. So we can say, because you opening the fridge and finding nothing was there, it was a disappointment. So therefore, opening the fridge was but that disappointment cannot have occurred if it wasn't in prarabdha. Whatever we experience is because it's in prarabdha. So you can say, yes, okay, opening the fridge, that was an action you were made to do by God in accordance with your prarabdha, because you were destined to experience that disappointment. But just because it's an action you were made to do by God, doesn't mean that it wasn't also an action that you did in accordance with your will. Because you were hungry, you wanted to eat food. So you open the fridge, not only under the sway of God's will, but also under the sway of your own will, because you wanted food. So this is why asking people, all people are constantly asking questions. In such and such a case, is it my will or is it God's will? Is it freedom of will and action or is it destiny? Well, in many cases, it's both. Because the simple way to take it is the vast majority of our actions, maybe 99.999% of our actions, we're doing under the sway of our will. Therefore, they are agamya. Many of those 99.9% may also be actions we're made to do by God, because it's in accordance with our prarabdha. So, but just because it's an action we're made to do by God doesn't mean that it isn't also an action we're doing under the sway of our vasanas. Therefore, it is agamya. So, what determines whether an action is agamya or not is whether we are acting under the sway of our vasanas. If we're honest, most of the actions we do are under the sway of our vasanas. Some of them may happen to coincide with God's will. In other words, with prarabdha, they may be in accordance with prarabdha. Therefore, their actions God is making us doing. So we are actually at that time working. Our will and God's will happen to synchronize. But whereas our will is to eat some food, it's God's will, but you shouldn't eat food. So we under the sway of our will, we open the fridge in order to eat food. We are disappointed. Why God made you open the fridge? Because because you were destined to experience that disappointment. So many actions are driven both by God in accordance with our prarabdha and by us in accordance with our vasanas, under the sway of our vasanas. So this is the simple principle. Whatever we are to experience, whatever we experience is prarabdha or God's will. Whatever we want to experience, whatever we try to experience, that's determined by our will. But however much we want to experience something and try to experience it, we cannot experience it unless it is prarabdha, unless it is God's will. So if we understand the principle, it's very, very simple. And all these questions citing this example, that example, they become redundant because we can't understand it from example. What we need to understand is the principle. We are constantly acting by mind, speech, and body under the sway of our vasanas. Therefore, those actions are agamya. We are also being made to act in such a way that we experience our prarabdha. But prarabdha determines what we are to experience. Our will determines what we want to experience and what we try to experience. Is that a clear answer?
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Okay, next question is what does Ramana mean by only knowledge that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is knowledge? Is this implying that as self we are just knowledge itself? If we are acting as the knower or feel that I know, that is a separation as an individual. Please elaborate.
Yes, the term Bhagavan uses for knowledge is the Tamil term arivu. It also means awareness. So the awareness that knows that the awareness that is, when he says devoid of knowledge and ignorance, he means devoid of knowledge or ignorance about anything other than ourselves. He puts it very nicely in verse 27 of Upadesha Undiyar. Wait a second, I'll just get the verse. What he says in verse 27 of Upadesha Undiyar, only the knowledge that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is knowledge. That means the awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance of anything other than ourselves, that is the real awareness. Unmeidu, this is real. Arivadaku ondru illai, there's nothing for knowing. That is, pure awareness alone is what actually exists. So in pure awareness, there's nothing other than ourselves to know. Since there's nothing other than ourselves to know, there's nothing other than ourselves not to know. So both knowledge and ignorance are absent in that state of pure knowledge, pure awareness. That is, there's no knowledge of or ignorance of anything other than ourselves. So long as we know things other than ourselves, it seems to us we know some things and we don't know other things. Now I know I'm sitting here. 10 years ago, I didn't know that I would be sitting here. So 10 years ago, I was ignorant of this fact. Now I know this fact. When I go to sleep tonight, I'm again going to become ignorant of the fact because I'll completely forget about all this. So both knowledge and ignorance, he says earlier in this idea also comes in Ulladu Narpadu. In verse 12 of Ulladu Narpadu, he says this. I'll just read verse 12 of Ulladu Narpadu. He says, what is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually knowledge. Remembering knowledge here means awareness. That which knows is not real knowledge. That which knows here means ego. That which knows things other than itself, that is not the real knowledge. And then he says, since it shines or one shines, there's no clear subject there. Since one shines without another for knowing or for causing to know, oneself is knowledge. Oneself is the pure awareness. That is, there's nothing other than ourself to know or to cause to be known or to cause to know. That is, we alone are. So we alone are the real knowledge. So long as knowing anything other than ourselves is not real knowledge. So if we go back a couple of verses, in verse 10, he says, without ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Without knowledge, ignorance does not exist. What he means by that is the knowledge and ignorance he's talking about here is knowledge and ignorance of other things. So long as we know things other than ourselves, there are things we know and things we don't know. So it seems to us. And when we come to know something, we know that prior to knowing that, we didn't know it. So the knowledge, the prior ignorance comes into existence only when we know something, because nothing actually exists independent of our knowledge of it. So if you come to know something, supposing we come to know something in the news, there's, I don't know, there's in the US, there's an election this year, and the two likely candidates are Trump and Biden. We didn't know that some time ago. At a certain point in time, we came to know this fact. When we come to know this fact, we know, oh, prior to my knowing it, I was ignorant of it. So the knowledge we have of anything is always against a background of ignorance. And the ignorance of something doesn't exist until we know that thing. So the knowledge and ignorance of things other than ourselves are a dyad. They're a pair of opposites. Each depends upon the other. That's what he's saying here. And then he says, only the knowledge that knows oneself, who is the first, as to whom is that knowledge and ignorance, is knowledge. Here, this is what Bhagavan is saying here is very, very deep. So we need to pay close attention to it. When he says, only that knowledge which knows oneself, what does he mean by oneself here? We need to pay close attention to it. When he says oneself who is the first, he implies who is the first to rise. So that is ego. And how do we know that? By investigating to whom are knowledge and ignorance. But when we know ourselves, knowing ego, that means we don't actually know ego. What we know is the reality of ego. So what he implies here is only that knowledge which knows the reality of ego, who is the first, and to who is the one to whom knowledge and ignorance appear, is knowledge. In other words, knowing ourselves as we actually are is knowledge. And what we actually are is the reality of ego, who is the one to whom there are knowledge and ignorance. So Bhagavan puts it in, we need to understand very precisely, because otherwise people, in some translations, they put only the knowledge that knows the self with a capital S, who is the first to whom knowledge and ignorance, to whom there is knowledge and ignorance. There's no, to the self. The self means ourself as we actually are. For ourself as we actually are, what we actually are is pure awareness. So there's no knowledge and ignorance for ourself as we actually are. So we need to understand when he said the knowledge that knows oneself means the knowledge that knows oneself, knows the reality of oneself as ego. Now, what we actually are is the reality of ego, and it's to ego that the knowledge and ignorance appear. And then in verse 11, he says, not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance. So again here, oneself who knows is ego. But knowing oneself means knowing the reality of ego. Because when we know the reality of ego, we'll know there's no such thing as ego at all. But until so if we don't know the reality of ego, the one who knows, we consequently know other things, and knowing other things is ignorance. Again, here we need to understand the underlying principle, because it could seem here, but Bhagavan is saying, but knowing other things is ignorance if we don't know ourselves. But if we know ourselves, then knowing other things is not ignorance. It could be interpreted in that way, but that is not what Bhagavan means, because what Bhagavan clearly teaches, we know other things only when we rise as ego. And so long as we rise as ego, we are ignorant of what we actually are. So knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance, according to Bhagavan. Andri Arivo, besides, is it knowledge? In other words, it's not at all knowledge. That's a rhetorical question. Then he says, when one knows oneself, the support for knowledge and the other, knowledge and ignorance cease. The support, knowledge and the other means knowledge and ignorance. The support for knowledge and the other is ego. Because it's only without ego, there's no knowledge or ignorance of anything else, because it's only ego that knows other things, and therefore seems to not know. I mean, therefore doesn't know other things. It knows some things, it doesn't know other things, in other words. But when one knows oneself, means when one knows the reality of ego, which is the support for knowledge and other, knowledge and ignorance will cease. So knowledge and ignorance of things other than ourselves exists only so long as we rise as ego, and therefore do not know ourselves as we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, this ego will cease, and therefore its knowledge and ignorance will also cease. And then verse 12, as I said, he says, what is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually knowledge. That which knows is not real knowledge. That which knows here means ego, which is what knows things other than itself. Since one shines, here one is referring to ourself as we actually are. Since we shine without another for knowing or causing to know, we are oneself is knowledge, Tanarivam. So we alone are the real knowledge, the real awareness. Why? Because we shine without anything else, either to know or to not know, or to cause to know. And then he ends by saying, Parandru, not a void. That means what we actually are is not a void. It's the fullness of pure awareness. No. And then in verse 13, I'm reading all these verses because these are all connected. In verse 13, he says, Jnanamam tane me. That means oneself who is jnana alone is real. Jnana here, whereas in the previous verses, he was using the Tamil term arivu. In this verse, he switches to the Sanskrit term jnana, which again, in this context, jnana means awareness. When he says oneself who is awareness, oneself who is jnana, he means oneself who is awareness. So jnana in this first sentence means pure awareness, what we actually are. So jnanamam tane me, oneself who is awareness alone is real. Then in the next sentence, he says, nanavam jnanam ajnanamam. That means knowledge that is manifold is ignorance. Knowledge that is manifold means awareness of many things. That is, the nature of ego is to be always aware of many things. That is, we cannot rise and stand as ego without grasping form. In other words, without being aware of things other than ourselves. So the knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance, is basically what Bhagavan is saying. Awareness that is manifold is ignorance. And then he goes on to say, this is a very important point. Even, I'll just say one thing here. The ignorance he's referring to here is not exactly the same as when he was talking about knowledge and ignorance. He was talking about knowledge and ignorance of things other than ourselves. Whereas here he says, knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance. So both the knowledge and ignorance referred to in the earlier verses is what he declares to be ignorance here. So knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance, which, as he said in verse 11, knowing other things is ignorance. So here he says, being aware of multiplicity is ignorance. Awareness that is manifold is ignorance. But then he goes on to say, and this is important, even ignorance, which is unreal, does not exist except as oneself who is awareness. That is, what we actually are is pure awareness. The ignorance that is, what he refers to as ignorance here is ego, that which is aware of many things. Even that ignorance does not exist except as oneself who is awareness. And then he gives an analogy to illustrate this. All the many ornaments are unreal. Do they exist except as gold, which is real? So why does he say ornaments are unreal? Because if you've got gold ornaments, supposing you've got a gold bangle, today it may be a bangle. Tomorrow you can melt it and make it into 3 rings. So since it was one thing one day and another thing another day, what is it really? Is it really a bangle or is it really a ring? It's neither. So the ornaments, the forms are unreal. Do they exist except as gold, which is real? So why does he say gold is real? This obviously, as far as this analogy is concerned, because gold is constant. That is, one day it may be in the form of a bangle, the next day it may be in the form of a ring, the next day it may be in the form of a necklace, the next day it may be in the form of a gold biscuit. Whatever it is, whatever form it is, it's still gold. So relatively speaking, the gold is real. The idea here is substance is real, form is unreal. But if we go deeper, even gold is a form. So in the ultimate analysis, the one real substance is only, that is the Sanskrit word vastu, or Tamil word porul, which are both words Bhagavan often uses. More because he's spoken, wrote in Tamil, he more frequently used the term porul, but he sometimes also used the word vastu, which mean exactly the same thing. That is substance that is, gold is used as an analogy for that substance, but that substance is, gold is only a material substance. It's not a real substance. When Bhagavan talks about porul or vastu, he's talking about the real substance, and that real substance is satchit. the pure being awareness. So that is the substance. So when he said in the previous sentence, even ignorance which is unreal does not exist except as oneself, who is awareness, that is, we ourselves are the pure awareness I am. That is the real substance. Ignorance is just something that appears from that. That is, ego appears from Satchit. But it cannot exist independent of Satchit. But Satchit is not ego. Just like the snake and the rope. The snake is a rope, but we can't say the rope is a snake. We can say the rope is what appears to be a snake, but we can't say the rope is actually a snake. But we can say the snake is actually a rope. So that ignorance here means ego or mind, which knows many things. That is unreal, but it cannot even seem to exist independent of a pure awareness, which is its underlying basis. So when Bhagavan says, coming back to the question about when he says, both in the first sentence of verse 12 of Ullutunaptu and in the first sentence of verse 27 of Upadesha, when he says the knowledge which is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is the real knowledge, what he means by that is awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance of anything other than itself. That is the real awareness. Awareness that experiences knowledge or ignorance of other things, that awareness is ego, which is not the real knowledge. That's why he said that which knows is not real knowledge. So all these verses, he's saying the same thing, but in so many different ways. Basically, real awareness is only pure awareness, which is devoid of awareness of anything other than itself. Awareness of anything other than oneself, that is ego. That is not real knowledge. So knowledge and ignorance of other things is only for ego. As ego, we can say, I know this, I don't know that. But what we actually are is beyond that knowledge and ignorance, because it's a pure awareness for which there's nothing other than itself for it to know or to not know. Take sleep, for example. In sleep, we don't know anything. Well, we know we are, but we don't know anything else. So is sleep a state of ignorance? No, it's not, because there's nothing other than ourselves for us to either to know or to not know. So sleep is, as Bhagavan repeatedly emphasized, sleep is not a state of ignorance, it's a state of pure awareness. Knowledge and ignorance exist only for ego, and ego exists only in waking and dream. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
So sorry. So even pure awareness, that when you say it's knowledge of itself or that it's pure awareness, that's not like the language doesn't really capture that, right? It's something beyond
the language. Doesn't capture it because it's the very nature of awareness to be aware of itself. Because we can't be aware without being aware that we are aware. And we can't be aware but we are aware without being aware but we are. So self-awareness is the very nature of awareness. There can't be awareness without self-awareness. So though we say aware, I am aware of myself, this is just a limitation of language, because myself is not an object of awareness. In sleep, what are we aware of? We're aware I am. But that doesn't mean I am is an object of awareness. I am is the awareness itself. So the awareness I am, in other words, the awareness of ourself, of our own being, is the very nature of awareness. Is that clear?
Yeah.
I mean, language, that is, from the very start, we need to understand the limitations of language. This can never be, words can never adequately capture this. In the in the Upanishads it said, Brahman is that from which words and thoughts turn back, because they can never reach you. Words and thoughts can never reach it. Bhagavan says the same in the first Mangalam verse of Uludunapadu, that Ullaporul, the existing substance, the reality, that which actually exists, it exists in the heart without thought. Ululara, it's without thought or without thinking. So how to think of that which is beyond, which is devoid of thinking? Because thinking is the nature of ego, and ego is what obscures that reality. That is, so long as we rise as ego, we know I am, but we don't know what I am. Because instead of knowing I am as just I am I, we know ourselves as I am this person, I am this body. So the language, all the language can do, it can point us in the right direction. But as Bhagavan said, the real knowledge can be found only in our own heart. We can study all of we can study all of Bhagavan's writings. We can study all of the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutra, the commentaries on them, the different interpretations of them. We can go on and on studying. We cannot know Brahman except by turning our mind within, because the whole point of Vedanta, the whole point of the Upanishads is Tattvamasi, you are that. So stop looking for that outside. Look for that within yourself. That is, if Brahman is ourself, it cannot be something other than ourself. So looking for Brahman in books, we can never find it. We can only find it within ourselves, as ourself. Is that clear?
Yeah. So when sometimes you often say like Brahman is something, really it's not something or nothing as well. It's neither of something nor nothing, right?
Yeah, words cannot capture it. Possibly the simplest way to say it is the only thing. It's ekameva advaitiyam, one only without a second. So it's not nothing, it's not everything, it's the only thing. But as the only thing, that means it is everything, because there's nothing other than it. It's all there is. And it's not a thing in the sense that other things are things. So it's no, that is, all we can say is beyond thoughts, it's beyond words. But it is ourself. So know us. If we want to know Brahman, we have to know ourselves. And to know ourselves, we need to turn our attention back towards ourselves and attend to ourselves alone. So long as we're knowing anything other than ourselves, even to the slightest extent, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are, because what we actually are is pure awareness, awareness that is completely devoid of any awareness or ignorance of anything else. Someone has written here, Brahman is all. Better to consider it as Brahman is everything. So Brahman is the only thing, because if we think of it as all suggests many things. It is all there is. It's all in the sense it's the only thing there is. Is that as satisfactory as words can give an answer?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, all of Vedanta is meaningless without practice. The whole point of Vedanta is pointing us towards the practice. And Bhagavan's teacher, Bhagavan makes that so clear. Bhagavan, that is, often the emphasis on practice seems to get lost in other expressions of Vedanta. But Bhagavan is constantly emphasizing the need for practice.
One more question.
Yes.
So can we have a direct experience of Brahman before destroying ego, or direct experience
No,
of Brahman
no,
it comes
no.
after?
Even now you have direct experience of Brahman. Brahman is what is shining in you as I. But you are not aware of Brahman as it actually is, because no, that I am is Brahman. But now you know yourself as I am this person, I am this body. So ego is that adjunct conflated awareness. So long as that pure awareness I am, which is Brahman, is mixed and conflated with adjuncts, you don't know Brahman as it actually is. So the destruction of ego and the knowing of Brahman are one and the same thing.
So it's better to investigate the snake, because even if I try to investigate the rope, it's not really the rope that I'm
You
seeing
cannot
clearly.
investigate the snake without thereby investigating the rope, because they're one and the same thing. You may think you're looking at a snake, but if you look at it carefully, what do you see? Oh, it's just a rope. So they're one and the same thing. They're not two different things. When you see it as a rope, you see it as it is. When you see it as a snake, you see it as something other than what it actually is. So ego is a false awareness of ourselves, a misperception of ourselves. We are seeing ourselves as if we are something other than what we actually are. So as ego, we can never know Brahman. But just because we cannot know Brahman doesn't mean we shouldn't try to know Brahman, because Brahman is what we actually are. So ego needs to try to know what it actually is. When it knows what it actually is, it ceases to be ego and remains as it actually is. If we talk about in terms of, rather than using words like Brahman, if we use the term pure awareness, we cannot know pure awareness as an object. We can only know pure awareness by being pure awareness. So pure awareness is what we actually are. As ego, we are to investigate ourselves. By investigating ourselves, we are withdrawing our attention from all other things and focusing our entire attention on ourselves. When we focus our attention on ourselves keenly enough, we will cease to be aware of anything else and will be aware of ourself alone. Being aware of ourself alone is pure awareness. That pure awareness is that is experiencing ourselves with pure awareness is the destruction of ego.
Let's say a practical example, my dear Michael and Namo
Yeah.
Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana.
Rapt attention, I listen to you, right? Because there's so much wealth. And as I'm listening, it's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. And I go, who is this listening? And then suddenly I can't hear anything. Is that madness, or is that sort of like baby step beginning? Like, is that right?
That is the whole purpose of Bhagavan's teachings. The whole purpose of Bhagavan's teaching is to turn our attention back to ourselves. To the extent to which our attention is turned towards ourselves, to that extent we cease to be aware of other things. So the more our attention is focused on ourselves, the more other things recede into the background, so to speak. And when our entire attention is fixed on ourselves, everything else dissolves and we alone remain.
Thank you for validating. Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya.
The next question.
Yes.
I'm sometimes a little confused between self-attention and self-inquiry. Is it enough that one has pure awareness, pay attention to oneself, as that pure awareness not affiliated to mind? Will this bring about the result of the destruction of the ego as it intensifies and deepens? Or is self-inquiry needed to bring about the final end? Or is it that self-inquiry and self-attention are the exact same thing? Some speakers on Bhagavan say that self-inquiry is secondary and not Bhagavan's original teaching. Self-attention is the original teaching of Bhagavan, and self-inquiry was merely an aid if one couldn't take to self-attention naturally. Is this the case? Also,
yeah.
Okay, well then let's do that. Then there's something else after that.
Okay. I'll answer that bit first. Let us pay close attention to what Bhagavan himself said. What does Bhagavan say? What is the definition that Bhagavan gives for Atmavichara? Atmavichara is a Sanskrit word, a term that means self-investigation or self-inquiry. It means inquiry in the sense of investigation. The problem with the English word inquiry can mean investigation. It can also mean asking questions. But when Bhagavan talks about Atmavichara, he's not talking about asking questions. It's not about asking the question, who am I? Bhagavan never says ask who am I, he says investigate who am I. Yes, in English books, it's often recorded as if Bhagavan said, ask who am I? But that is not actually what Bhagavan said. He said, investigate who am I? This is the inadequacy of the recordings and the translations of Bhagavan's teachings. So it's best a less confusing term than self-inquiry is self-investigation. That's why I generally prefer to use the term self-investigation. But the original term Bhagavan used in Sanskrit is Atmavichara. In Tamil, he used the term Tannatam, which means exactly the same, self-investigation. So what he says Atmavichara is, the definition he gives in Nana is Sadakalamam Manate Atmavil Vetirapatikutan Atmavicharam Endrupaya. That means, the literal translation is, the name Atmavichara is only for always keeping the mind on oneself. That's a literal meaning. When he says it's only for, that means this name Atmavichara refers only to the keeping the mind on oneself. So Atmavichara is nothing but keeping our mind on ourselves. Keeping our mind on ourselves means what? If you keep your mind on something, that means you are attending to it. You're keeping your attention on it. If in a school, in a classroom, in a school, if a teacher sees one of the children looking out of a window, the teacher may say, put your mind on the subject, put your mind on the book you're supposed to be reading. What do they mean when they say put your mind on it? They mean put your attention on it. So putting the mind on something means attending to it. So Bhagavan here says that Atmavichara is nothing but putting the mind on ourselves. In other words, nothing but attending to ourselves. So self-inquiry, self-investigation, Atmavichara is nothing but self-attentiveness. That's the main point. I can't remember all the other things that were asked, but that's the main point. Atmavichara and self-attentiveness are one and the same. So there's no self-inquiry other than Atmavichara. Other than self-attentiveness. Regarding people who say that self-inquiry is not the real teaching of Bhagavan or a secondary teaching of Bhagavan, they do not know what they're talking about, because it's what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Bhagavan's teachings are all about turning our attention back to ourselves. The sole aim of all of Bhagavan's teaching is to direct our attention back towards ourselves. Some people say, oh, no, Bhagavan had a higher teaching. Bhagavan's higher teaching was being. Self-inquiry is something lower than that. Just being as you are, that's Bhagavan's highest teaching. Yes, be as you are is Bhagavan's highest teaching. But how to be as you are? Only by attending to yourself. Because so long as we're attending to anything else, we are rising as ego and engaging in mental activity. In order to be as we are, we need to attend to ourselves. So attending to ourselves and being as we actually are one and the same thing, as Bhagavan made abundantly clear. So people take little bits and pieces from Bhagavan's teachings. Instead of trying to have a coherent understanding of it, they say, oh, this aspect of Bhagavan teaching is higher than that aspect. Self-inquiry is superior to self-surrender. Bhagavan has clearly said self-inquiry, self-investigation is itself self-surrender. We cannot surrender ourselves without attending to ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, ego subsides, and the subsidence of ego is self-surrender. So whether you call it just being as we actually are, or just being, or attending to ourselves, or surrendering ourselves, it's all one and the same. We achieve all of these by turning our attention back to ourselves, because by attending to ourselves, we thereby bring about the subsidence of ourself as ego. To the extent to which we subside, to that extent we are being as we actually are. And to that extent we are also surrendering ourselves. Surrendering ourselves means surrendering ego. So it's Bhagavan is teaching one thing and one thing alone, and he's very, very consistent and very coherent in what he teaches. We just need to understand correctly. So long as we think that self-surrender and self-investigation are different, or that being and self-investigation are different, we haven't truly understood what Bhagavan is talking about. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question. I think you said there was a bit more, Chris.
Yeah, there's a bit more.
Yeah.
Also, please could you clarify what Bhagavan means when he says seek out the source? I often come across quotes of him saying something like this, but can't pull out a particular quote. Thanks.
Bhagavan doesn't actually say seek the source. He says investigate the source. Earlier at the beginning, I read in verse 28, Bhagavan says, we need to know the rising place of the rising ego. Eramba mahande eramidate. But the ego which rises, the place from which the rising ego rises. That place is what is often translated in English as source, because Bhagavan is using the word idam, place, in a metaphorical sense. So that is the source. What is that source? From where can ego rise other than from ourself? If ego rose from something other than ourself, then it wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense if ego is rising from something. So ego rises from what we actually are. What we actually are is what alone exists and shines in sleep. From sleep, ego rises, either in waking or in dream. So ego is rising only from ourself as we actually are. In other words, it's rising from our being, rising from the fundamental awareness I am. So that is not something we have to seek, because it's always shining. We simply have to attend to it or investigate it. So that's what, when Bhagavan says, it's sometimes in some books it puts seek the source, but if you talk about seeking the source, you seek something that you don't know. Bhagavan did occasionally use verbs that mean seek. For example, he used the Tamil verb tedu. Tedu means seek. For example, in verse 25 of Ulugnappadu, he says, Tedinal otum pidicum. That literally means it's seeking, it takes flight. But he's using seeking there in the sense of investigating. He's not suggesting we should look for something other than ourselves. It is ego investigating its own reality. In other words, it's ego trying to see, who am I? It's ego attending to itself in order to see what it actually is. What it actually is the source from which it has risen. So investigating our being, investigating the source from which we've risen, investigating what we actually are. These are all one and the same thing. That's why I say we shouldn't just take the words. We need to understand what those words are pointing at. And they're all pointing at the same thing. So whether Bhagavan says, investigate ego, investigate the source of ego, investigate yourself, it's all one thing we're investigating. It's only ourself we're investigating.
So is what am I more appropriate than who am I?
Both are equally, Bhagavan used both terms. It makes no difference. It's not the words that matter. It's what we're investigating that matters. When we say investigate what am I or investigate who am I, we are trying to know who or what we actually are. In other words, we're trying to know ourselves. So we need to, Bhagavan has used many different words in different places, but they're all pointing in the same direction. So what is important is not the words that Bhagavan has used, but what he is pointing at through those words. Bhagavan generally uses very, very simple language. But what he's talking about is something very, very deep. So we shouldn't be deceived by the simplicity of Bhagavan's language. When he says the rising place of the rising ego, it's a very simple way of putting it, but it has a very, very deep meaning. Because what is it from where does ego rise? It rises only from ourselves. So we ourselves are the rising place of the rising ego. In other words, we have a place from which this rising ego rises. So we who now seem to be this rising ego need to know what we actually are. When we know what we actually are, we will know the source from which we have risen. Because what we actually are is the source from which we've risen. Was there anything more to the question, Chris?
No, that was it. That was it.
Okay. I don't know who asked it, but I hope I adequately answered that.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that was confidential or not.
Anyway, it's okay.
Yeah. So next one, Michael was already speaking about this today, to let go of even using words for I, even mentally, not just in words, but still. If there would be no identification with body or mind, there would be no need for self-investigation at all. Yeah. Isn't it? So it's probably normal to, at least for beginning, to get into investigation, one uses aid of body and mind, that is, mentally uses word, I, and then feel it where in body this is arising, right? Then somehow this I disappear, and also feeling of body somehow dissolves. So how to know that one is actually centered in the feeling of I and not in some imaginary world? Because more I practice, more this feeling of I is subtle and more difficult to grasp. So how to know at that more subtle level that one is still progressing towards the self and not floating at some level of mind and ego and actually being lost in Maya, but one thinks it is samadhi but is imaginary dream state? How to know when self is realized?
Well, when self is realized, there'll be no doubt, because what realizes self is self itself, and it always knows itself as it is. Regarding how we know whether we are doing this correctly, or that, it's more or less that's a question I think that was asked. This is where understanding comes in. This is why it is necessary to pay close attention to what Bhagavan says. Paying close attention to what he says is called Sravana. Then we have to make sense of what he says. That is, when we pay close attention to the words, in order to try to understand what he's saying. So that effort to understand what he's saying, the effort to make sense of what he's saying, is what is called manana. This Sravana and manana they're insufficient by themselves, but they're both necessary. If we don't understand, if we don't have a clear understanding of what we are and what we are not, we won't be able to investigate ourselves. For example, if I understand that this body is myself and I'm asked to investigate myself, I'll start investigating this body. If I take myself to be the mind, I'll start investigating all the thoughts and things. So we need to have a clear understanding of what Bhagavan is actually talking about. That is why, as I mentioned earlier, the term sakshi is often used, witness. Terms like drikdrisya viveka are used. All these are, the aim of all these is to help us distinguish ourself as the knower or witness or seer from everything that we know or see. So what we are investigating is not any object, it's not any feeling. It is we ourselves. A feeling is something that is felt. People often talk about the I feeling, but that's a rather inadequate translation. In Tamil, it's nanenam unavu. Unavu, in some contexts, can mean feeling, but when Bhagavan uses the term unavu or arivu, he's using them in the sense of awareness. So it's the awareness eye that we're investigating. It's not some feeling. A feeling is something that is felt. A feeling is also, the word feeling suggests something that is rather vague. But there's nothing that is clearer and more obvious than I. Whatever else we know it because we know I am. That is, our fundamental awareness is this awareness I am. So this awareness I am is what we are investigating. And it's obviously not an object. It's not anything known by us as something. An object is something that is known by us as other than ourselves. It is the reality of the subject. It's the reality of the knower, the seer, the witness. So we need to think very carefully about what Bhagavan is saying and understand it clearly. If we've understood it clearly, then we won't be in doubt as to whether we're investigating ourselves or something else. Because, I mean, it's difficult to put it in words, but I mean, it should be obvious to us. If we understand, but we are not any object, we are that which knows all objects. This is the starting point. We are actually not even that which knows objects, but that which knows objects is ego. But we have to start from somewhere. So we start from ourself as ego, as the knower of all other things. So we're not attending to anything that is known. We're attending to a knower, that which knows, that which is aware. Of course, that which is aware is known, but it's not known as an object. So the words are always inadequate. That's why we need to consider carefully what Bhagavan has said, try to make sense of it, and then put it into practice. The more we put it into practice, the clearer it will become. If you see a map of a distant country, a country you've never been to before, you'll be able to read the symbols on the map and you'll get a vague idea. Oh, there are mountains, there's rivers, there's a city, there's this, there's that. But there's only a limited understanding you can get from that map. But if you take that map with you and travel to that country, then all the symbols you see on the map will become more meaningful to you. Because you see, oh, this is the mountain that is referred to here. This is the river. This is the city. You begin to get a much fuller knowledge of that place by actually visiting there than you could get from a map. Likewise, Bhagavan's teachings are like a map. They're pointing us in the right direction. But we cannot fully understand Bhagavan's teachings without actually putting them into practice. So we need to pay close attention to what Bhagavan says. We need to think about it and make sense of it, understand what he's pointing our attention back to ourselves. So what does he mean by ourself? We need to understand that. Then we need to try to put it into practice. The more we put it into practice, the more meaningful Bhagavan's words will become to us. And I mean, if we have doubt about whether we're doing it correctly or incorrectly, that probably means we're not doing it so correctly. I'm not saying we're doing it totally incorrectly, but if we really if we are really doing it correctly, we'll be in no doubt that this is what we should be doing. It doesn't mean that it becomes easy. It's still difficult because we have the real difficulty isn't because it's subtle, because yes, our self is subtler than the subtlest, but it's also more obvious than the most obvious, because nothing is more obvious than I am. Muruganar says in the Anupallavi of Anma-Vidde, even for the dullest of people, Atma is so obvious, so clear. Even the Amalaka fruit in the palm, in comparison, is something unclear. Because nothing is clearer than I am. We all know I am. But one thing we can never have any doubt, never can have any reasonable doubt about is our own existence, our own being. That's what we have to attend to. So it's subtle, but also very clear. It is, why is it so clear? Because it is by the light of this self-awareness, but everything else appears. Without being aware I am, we could not be aware I am this body. And we could not be aware I know this, I know that. So all knowledge depends upon this fundamental knowledge, this fundamental awareness, I am. That is what we are to investigate. And it is not an object, it is the reality of the subject. So we shouldn't be looking outwards, we should be looking inwards. Even outwards, inwards, again, these terms are inadequate. But why Bhagavan uses the terms outward and inwards? Because language is inadequate. He has to use some terms. We need to understand when Bhagavan talks about looking outwards, it means attending to anything other than ourselves. That includes our thoughts, feelings, everything, all phenomena are outside. When he talks about looking within, he means looking at I alone. Everything other than I is external, it's extraneous to ourselves. So this is why this Sravana and Manana are so important. Because without adequate Sravana Manana, we cannot even begin the investigation. So we need to do the Sravana Manana to understand what Bhagavan is actually asking us to do. Once we've understand that, we start doing it. And then our Sravana Manana will become much deeper because we actually were beginning to understand from our own experience what Bhagavan is talking about. So his words become clearer to us. They become more meaningful to us the deeper we go in this practice. That is why in classical Advaita, they constantly emphasizing Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, because this is the only way of progressing. We can't even begin with Nididhyasana, the actual practice, until we've got at least a sufficient degree of Sravana Manana. We need a sufficient degree even to begin on this path, because we need to understand what we are to do. And as we go deeper, the Sravana Manana goes deeper. And as the Sravana Manana goes deeper, we're able to go deeper in the practice. So it's the Sravana Manana are great support to us as we progress on this path. They're necessary to get us started, and they help us to a great extent as we progress. Because by constantly rereading what Bhagavan has written and thinking about it carefully, that is also encouraging us to investigate ourselves more and more and more. So it both gives us guidance, direction, and also encouragement, motivation. Bhagavan used to talk about satsanga. People think satsanga means you have to go and sit in the presence of a living guru or something. But Bhagavan was much clearer in what he said. He said the best satsanga is Atma Sangha. That is, Atma alone is Sat. In other words, we alone are Sat. So having Sangha with ourselves, in other words, associating with ourselves, in other words, Atma, the best satsanga is self-investigation. Second to that is Bhagavan's teachings are the best source because they are what will be constantly reminding us of the need to turn within. So more important than being in the physical presence, understanding what Bhagavan is asking us to do and trying our best to do it, that's a real satsanga. There are people who live 50 years in the presence of Bhagavan, but their ignorance didn't go. Bhagavan uses an analogy in Guru Vachika Kuvai. He says it's like the shadow at the foot of a lamp. In old days, when you had a lamp on top of a post, around the post, you'll have a shadow there. Bhagavan said, those who live till they grow old in the presence of the Sadguru without trying to follow this path, they're just like the shadow at the foot of a lamp. People after 1,000 years, if they read Bhagavan and really are dedicated to following what Bhagavan said, they are having far truer satsanga with Bhagavan than those who happen to be blessed to be in his physical presence. Of course, being in Bhagavan's physical presence will not go in vain. Anyone who is blessed to be in Bhagavan's physical presence will certainly be benefited thereby. But if we want to get the greatest benefit from Bhagavan, we need to follow why did Bhagavan come? He didn't come just to be another God. There's thousands of gods we can worship. He didn't come just to be another God to worship. He came to show us the way to know what we actually are. And knowing what we actually are is knowing the reality of all the many different names and forms of God. So Bhagavan came as Guru. And the purpose of the outward form of Guru is to turn our attention back within where the real Guru is shining as our own being, as I am. And that is the true form of Bhagavan. I hope that was an adequate answer to that question.
Okay. Next question. Have you experienced losing mental purity after having a pure mind that has been crystal clear for years, allowing deep practice of vichara? Then one day you wake up, it seems gone, making practice very difficult. Almost seems like starting over. What do you think causes this? Is battling vasanas and will the issue such as life-altering changes that cause mental anguish? Besides persevering and keeping trying to go within, do you have any advice on trying to regain the purity once had?
What is purity is the state of freedom from impurity. So what is the impurities in the mind? Well, obviously the root impurity is ego itself. That is being free of ego is the state of perfect purity. But until then, what are all the other impurities that reinforce this root impurity? All the other impurities are our Vishaya vasanas. So long as there are Vishaya vasanas in the mind, we cannot say the mind is pure. But to the extent to which we follow Bhagavan's path, those Vishaya vasanas will be weakened. And the weakening of Vishaya vasanas is what is called purification of mind, because the impurities are diminishing. So when we're following the spiritual path, we may not even be aware of we may not be aware of the purification that takes place. In fact, often it will seem to us that we are worse off than when we started. Why is that? Sadhu Om gave a nice analogy for that. He said, or he gave two analogies. He said, if you've got a really dirty cloth, you can't see the deeply rooted stains in the deeply embedded stains in it. But if you begin to wash the cloth, if you remove the more superficial dirt, then the deeply embedded stains will become more clearly visible. And then you have to try and tackle those. That's one analogy he used. So the other analogy he used is of the moon. If you have a crescent moon, you can't see any craters. Even if you've got a half moon, you can only very vaguely make out the craters. As the moon becomes fuller and fuller, the craters become clearer and clearer. So craters can be seen most clearly in the full moon. Likewise, the deeply embedded impurities in the mind become more and more visible to us as our mind is purified more and more. So it often seems to us that because we become more aware of those impurities, it seems to us that we are worse off than we started. If you see the devotional poetry of any great saint, any really advanced person on this path, you will find they're constantly lamenting their own unworthiness, their complete unworthiness. I mean, you can see this in Bhagavan's own songs to Arunachala. Of course, Bhagavan had already gone beyond all imperfection, but he sang Aksharamlai from the perspective of a devotee, an aspirant. So he talks about his he's constantly lamenting his own the mind that is wandering around the world and being worse than a dog and so on and so forth. This you'll find in Manikavasika, you find in Murugan, you find in all great saints. You'll find they're constantly talking about their own how totally unworthy they are. And when they get the grace, they appreciate it is this. I mean, Murugan has sung, this worthless dog who was roaming about the streets, you picked me up and saved me. So because as the mind gets purer and purer, we become more and more aware of the impurities. We become more and more aware of the strength of our desires and attachments. So we may be purer now than we were when we started 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but it seems to us that we've made no progress. We may even seem to have gone backwards. But that's a clear sign that we're making progress. When we begin to be aware of our own unworthiness, our own lack of real love to follow this path, that means we're beginning to make progress. So let's not lament the fact that we feel ourselves to be impure. Let's focus on that is, Bhagavan didn't ask us to dwell on our impurities. He asked us to investigate ourselves. Who is the one who feels I'm impure? Who is it who feels I'm the worst of the worst sinners? That is what we need to investigate. So let's not worry about whether the mind is pure or impure or anything. Who is it who is, to whom do all these impurities appear? Who is this I who feels, oh, I'm so impure, I'm so unworthy, I'm such a sinner, I've got so much desires, attachments, and terrible thoughts and so on in my mind? Who is this I who feels all that? Because ultimately all that is a false identification. If you feel I am a sinner or I am impure, you're identifying yourself with the mind, with the person you take yourself to be. That is not what you actually are. What you actually are is pure being, pure awareness. So if we sometimes we may feel, I mean, from what you who asked this question, from what you say, it seems that you feel that you've not made any progress after so long. Just persevere in trying. Don't be disheartened when you come to see your own inadequacies. We're all inadequate. If why Bhagavan has come to save us? Because he knows he's come to save us not because of any qualification on ourselves. He's come to save us from ourselves. He's come to save us because we are such fallen creatures. We need him to come and save us, and he's shown us the way. By turning within, his grace is what has brought us to where we are now. The more we turn within, the more we are cooperating with his grace, the more we are yielding ourselves to his grace. So let's not be disheartened. Let's just keep on persevering in trying. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question. I mean, it's always difficult to answer these questions because we all face difficulties, and we just have the only solution to whatever difficulties we face is to persevere in this, in following this path Bhagavan has shown us.
We have
There's
to go
all these
from where we are.
imperfections are for what we seem to be. And the only way to go beyond what we seem to be is to know what we actually are. And to know what we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves and thereby surrender ourselves. Yes, sorry, Chris.
No, I just say we have to go from where we are. There's no choice.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't start a journey from anywhere where you happen to be at that moment. So it doesn't matter how we are supremely blessed, but by his grace, we've been drawn to Bhagavan. So let us not waste this opportunity. Even if our efforts seem very feeble and inadequate, let us make those efforts. Because Bhagavan has assured us, if we try, and if we persevere in trying, we will surely succeed. Because ultimately, we are not depending on our own efforts. We're depending on his grace. The effort we make is to yield ourselves to his grace, to not rebel against his grace, not to obstruct the working of his grace. But ultimately, it's only by his grace that we will be saved. Because we and our efforts are unreal. His grace alone is what is real. That is our own being, our own reality, the infinite love that we actually are.
So the next question is there a difference between being self and experiencing self?
No. Bhagavan has said very clearly in verse 26 of Upadeshundya, Tanai iritle, tanai aridlam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. We can't know ourselves without being ourselves. We can't be ourselves without knowing ourselves. They're one and the same thing.
Next question. When the attention is turned to I, there seems to be an awareness of the witness. So am I beyond the witness, or am I the witness which is aware of itself?
The term witness is, like all terms, it is used in different, this is where we have to go beyond words, because the term witness, like so many other terms, is used in different senses, in different contexts. The most immediate meaning, most obvious meaning of the term witness is the knower. So that which knows all this, that is the witness, that is ego. But the witness, the same term sakshi is also used to refer to the reality of ego, that is to Brahman. Brahman is sometimes referred to as Jiva Sakshi, the witness of Jiva, or Sarva Sakshi, the witness of all. Bhagavan has explained when the term Sakshi is applied to Brahman or to Atma Swarupa, it doesn't mean that Brahman is a knower of anything other than itself. in that context, Bhagavan said, Sakshi means sanadi. Sanadi means presence. So without the presence of Brahman, there wouldn't be anything. I mean, Brahman is that in the presence of which all this appears. Both the subject and the object appear only in the presence of Brahman. So in that sense, in the sense of the underlying presence, Brahman is the witness of all. But in a more superficial sense in which the term witness is often used, when, for example, when we talk about in classical Advaita, they often talk about Sakshi Chaitanya, the witness consciousness. That is ego. That which knows all this, that is ego. If we turn our attention back towards that witness, the one who knows all this, we never find any such thing as ego. We find the reality that underlies ego. But it's just like if you look carefully, so long as you don't look at the snake carefully enough, it seems to be a snake. But if you look at the snake carefully enough, what do you see? Oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, ego seems to be ego so long as it doesn't look at itself. To the extent to which ego looks at itself, it sees itself as it actually is, namely as pure awareness. So if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will see that we are nothing but pure awareness. So that pure awareness is the ultimate Sakshi, not the Sakshi in the sense of the knower of other things, but the Sakshi in the sense of that awareness that illumines all this, that enables ego to know all this. So that is the reality of ego. So that in one sense of the term Sakshi, Sakshi refers to ego. In the deeper sense of the term Sakshi, Sakshi refers to the reality of ego. But to know but to know the reality of ego, we need to investigate ego. And when we investigate ego, we say, oh, there's no such thing as ego, it's only pure awareness. What seemed to be pure awareness, what seemed to be ego is just pure awareness, just as what seemed to be a snake is only a rope. But in order to see that the snake is a rope, you need to look at it carefully. In order to see that ego is pure awareness, you need to look at it carefully. I hope that adequately answered that question.
The next question, you've, I think, pretty much covered a couple of questions back. Along with self-inquiry, did Bhagavan talk about, in any of his writings, the benefits of being in the physical presence of Agnani? I remember you saying that Bhagavan once said that the body of Agnani is God's offering in the form of prasad to the world. Then there's one other part of the question after that.
Okay, I'll deal with this first. Yes, being in the presence of a jnani is definitely beneficial, but the extent to which we are benefited by that depends upon how receptive we are. So many people came and some of them came to Bhagavan just for a few minutes, and they may have been fully benefited by that. Others lived with Bhagavan for 50 years, and to all outward appearances, they seem to have derived no benefit because they were still the same person. I mean, they didn't seem to have been reformed at all. So a lot of it depends upon our receptivity. But there's, as Bhagavan said, there's far more to satsanga than just being in the physical presence. Far more important than physical satsanga, mental satsanga. So mental satsanga, I'll tell you one incident that happened. There was an elderly North Indian couple who, after retirement, had come and settled in Tiruvannamalai. They had rented a house nearby the ashram, and they wanted to spend the last years of their life there in Bhagavan's presence. And they were a very devoted couple. At one time, some relatives from North India came to visit them. Because those relatives had come to stay, the wife had to remain at home cooking for them and attending to all their needs. So for 3 or 4 days while her guests were there, she wasn't able to come to the ashram. So she was feeling very sad about that. After her guests left, she came to Bhagavan and she prostrated and said, "Oh, Bhagavan, for 3 or 4 days I wasn't able to come here. I felt so sorry not to be able to come here." Bhagavan said to her, "It's better that you were there and thinking of here than here and thinking of there." What does that mean? If she had come to the ashram, she would have been sitting in Bhagavan's presence, but she would have been thinking about the guests. So I've got to cook food for them. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. Her mind wouldn't have been there. But she was at home and she was all the time thinking about Bhagavan. Oh, I wish I could be with Bhagavan. So when Bhagavan said it's better that you were there and thinking of here than here and thinking of there, what does that clearly mean? It clearly means the mental satsanga is more important than the physical satsanga. We can be in the presence of Bhagavan and thinking about so many other things. That is less beneficial than being thousands of miles away or even thousands of years away, but thinking of Bhagavan with love. So the mental satsanga is many, many, many times more efficacious than mere physical satsanga. Of course, there were those who were in the presence of Bhagavan whose minds were completely surrendered to Bhagavan. So they were getting the full benefit of both the physical and the mental satsanga. But most of us, I mean, there aren't many people living today. I mean, it's now 74 years since Bhagavan left the body. So there aren't many of us, many among us remaining who were there when Bhagavan was physically present. And after another 20 years or so, there'll be no living person who, well, I'd say 25 years probably, there'll be no living person who remembers having been in Bhagavan's presence. Does that mean we're missing out? No, it doesn't, because Bhagavan is always available to us. He's available to us. That is, the name and form of Bhagavan is there, so we can always think about his name and form. Better than just thinking about his name and form, why did he appear in this name and form? In order to give us teachings. So a better mental satsanga than merely meditating on his name and form is meditating on his teachings, reading his teachings, thinking about them deeply, and trying our best to put them into practice. And Bhagavan himself said the best satsanga of all is Atma Sangha. Atma Sangha is what is otherwise called Nididhyasana. In other words, putting this self-investigation, the Bhagavan teachings into practice by trying to attend to ourselves. Sangha means association. So how to associate with ourselves? We have to attend to ourselves. So that is the ultimate satsanga. All other forms of satsanga are auxiliary. They support this ultimate satsanga of attending to and being as we actually are. Another thing about the physical presence of Guru, being in the physical presence of Guru. If we want the physical presence of a jnana itself is there in the form of Arunachala. Bhagavan has praised Arunachala as he sang in one verse, Kutramutraritane Gunamai Panital Guru Guru Vayoli Arunachala. Completely removing my defects and making me gunam, making me one endowed with all good qualities, shine as my guru. So what is the function of guru? The function of guru is removing all our defects and bestowing upon us all good qualities. Good qualities mean the quality of not rising as ego, being as we actually are. So Bhagavan has pointed to Arunachala as his own guru. So if we want Guru Sangha, if we want to be in the physical presence of Guru, we have to go no further than Arunachala. And if we for some reason or other, if we're not able to be there, we can have a picture of Arunachala, we can think of Arunachala, because actually Bhagavan and Arunachala are one and the same. Bhagavan is Arunachala in human form. Arunachala is Bhagavan in hill form. But the true form of both Bhagavan and Arunachala, as Bhagavan made abundantly clear, the Swarupa, the Ramana Swarupa or Arunachala Swarupa is Atma Swarupa, Aham Swarupa. Now, that which is shining in our heart as I, that is the true form of Arunachala, that is the true form of Bhagavan. So the best satsanga of all is turning within and merging within. That is not to belittle other forms of satsanga. Being in the physical presence of Bhagavan or being in the physical presence of Arunachala, it is certainly beneficial. But in order to get the greatest benefit from that, we should be turning within. And the greatest support for turning within is constantly reading and thinking about Bhagavan's teachings, because they're constantly encouraging us and impressing upon us the need to turn within. So I hope that adequately answers that question.
Okay, now the last question is just to follow up to that other one. I recently read that an Advaita text called Tripura Rahasya was venerated by Ramana Maharshi and that he often quoted from it. Is this true, and if so, why did he hold it in such high regard?
I always find it difficult to answer these sort of questions. Bhagavan did sometimes refer to texts like Tripura. I don't know how much he referred to Tripura Rahasya. Usually things that people refer to more frequently are works like Ashtavakra Gita, Ribu Gita. People say Bhagavan referred to these. Though Ashram published a book, Tripura, an English translation of Tripura Rahasya, I've not actually read in any book Bhagavan referring to Tripura Rahasya, but I can remember. And I don't remember any old devotees saying that Bhagavan referred to that. He may have done sometimes in some contexts, but Bhagavan also, another text Bhagavan used to refer to sometimes is Kaivalya Navanita, which is a sort of a standard Advaitic text in Tamil. So Bhagavan did refer to these texts sometimes, but he also pointed out the shortcomings in some of these texts. For example, one idea that is expressed in Kaivalya Navanita. I think, if I remember correctly, it's in Kaivalya Navanita, and it's also there in many Sanskrit texts. I think it's even there in Shankara's Bhashya, where it is said that for the Jiva Mukta, the Jnani, but Agamya and Sanchita cease for the Jnani, for the Jiva Mukta, but Prarabdha remains for the duration of the body. This is a very, very prevalent idea in many Advaitic texts, both in Sanskrit and in Tamil. So, and I think Kaivalya Navanita is one. But Bhagavan has pointed out in Uludunapadu Anubandham, I think in verse, let me see, I think it's verse 33, if I remember correctly. Do I have it here? No, by saying I'll just get it. Yes, verse 33 of Uludunapdu Anubandham, Bhagavan says, saying Sanchita and Agamya do not adhere to the Jnani, but Prarabdha does remain, is an answer told to the question of others. Just as when a husband dies, no wife remains unwidowed, when the doer dies, all the three karmas will cease. So, though there's a reason why it is said in some texts, but Prarabdha remains for the Jnani, because many people take Vijnani to be the body. And for the body, yes, we can say there seems to be a prarabdha. For Bhagavan's body, the prarabdha was after he was prarabdha at the age of 16 to come to Tiruvannamalai to remain and everything. But that's all only for the body that the jnani seems to be. But that is not, that's, as he says, that's an answer told to the question of others. What does he mean by the others when he said the question of others? He means those who are not willing to have or able to have a deeper understanding. As Bhagavan often said, jnana me jnani. Jnana alone is the jnani. Jnana is pure awareness. So the jnani is nothing other than pure awareness. When he says jnana me jnani, jnana alone is the jnani, that means jnani means what knows. And jnana means knowledge. So what knows that pure awareness is only pure awareness. So the jnani is nothing but pure awareness. So how can there be any sanchita, agamya, or prarabdha? Sanchita, agamya, and prarabdha are for ego. The jnana is the state in which ego is destroyed. So when ego dies, the doer dies, as he puts it here, all the three karmas will cease. So, but can we say, but the Bhagavan didn't recommend Kaivalya Navanita? He probably referred to Kaivalya Navanita much more than he referred to Tripura Rahasya, because for many Tamils who weren't familiar with Advaita, when they came, Bhagavan of his own accord didn't suggest this, but when people asked, Bhagavan, is this a good text to read? He'd say, yes, it's a good text to read. Because you get a lot of important ideas there. But he also pointed out the shortcomings. Likewise, with many of these classical texts, Bhagavan pointed out, yes, there are good ideas there, but he also often pointed out shortcomings. So, Ribhu Gita, for example, people say Bhagavan recommended Ribhu Gita. Ribhu Gita is a nice text, but the basic theme of Ribhu Gita, it's constantly digging into the fact, I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I am Brahman. That is the underlying theme throughout. But Bhagavan's teachings that's the basic. Of course, we need to understand that. Of course, we need to understand that we're not this body or mind, but we're Brahman. But we shouldn't stop with that. Once we've understood that I am Brahman, what should we then do? We should investigate, who am I? Because we can't know Brahman simply by saying I am Brahman. So all these texts, they're useful at certain level, but none of these texts is as deep or as practical as Bhagavan's own writings. I would say one text like Nana or Ulladu Narpadu are worth 100 of these other texts. And these other texts you can read and you can get wrong ideas from them. You can get the idea that Vijnani is still a body and therefore experiencing prarabdha. So it's very simplistic to say, oh, Bhagavan recommended this, Bhagavan recommended that. For certain people, he may have recommended certain texts as beneficial for them. That doesn't mean that we have to go back to those when Bhagavan has given us, Bhagavan's teachings are so much deeper, so much more practical than these other texts. For someone who is able to appreciate the depth and richness of Bhagavan's own writings, these older texts will, as Sadhguru used to say, yes, Ribhu Gita, Ashtavakra Gita, these are all very nice texts if we didn't have Bhagavan's works. But once we have Bhagavan's works, once we've relished Bhagavan's works, if we go back to these, they're like stale gruel. If you've had a sumptuous feast and someone offers you stale gruel, you will not relish it. If you're really hungry, there's nothing better than that stale gruel. You'll give anything for that stale gruel. But once we've been exposed to the benefit of Bhagavan's teachings, these other things become insipid. They lose their appeal. Not to say that they're not nice things in them or that they're not useful for people at a certain stage, but Bhagavan's own original writings are so much deeper and so much more of far greater practical value. So this isn't said to put these other texts down. This is just to say, let's not overlook the great treasure that we have been given in the form of Bhagavan's works. If we study and understand and try to put Bhagavan's own work, what Bhagavan teaches in his own works, into practice, there's no need for all these other things.
Yeah, could I ask if Michael is familiar with Elam Andre and Bhagavad's recommendation of it to Annamalai Swami, that it is a powerful text for transformation?
Again, and it's the name of the text is Elam Andre. Elam Andre means all is one. Again, it's of all these texts that people say Bhagavan recommended, I think that is the there's really not very much in it. It's not really, and a lot of it is not really. The thing is, I read, I've not read it's a small work, Elam Andre, it's in Tamil. I've not actually read the Tamil version of it. I've read an English translation of it. And it's really not a very inspiring text. If we know Bhagavan's teachings, there's really nothing in Elam Andre but is of any significance or of use to us. It's not to say it's I mean, it is Advaitic, but it's a rather. A lot of ideas expressed in it are really ideas that are not very satisfactory from the perspective of Bhagavan's teachings. So, did Bhagavan recommend that to Annamalai Swami? He may well have done, because Bhagavan recommended. Bhagavan gave teachings appropriate to each person at their own level. He may have thought this is a suitable text for Annamalai Swami at the level he is at. But that doesn't, I don't think we should take it that that's a text for all of us, because Annamalai Swami even later, if you read, I think David Godman has produced a book on Annamalai Swami, or one or two books on Annamalai Swami. You will see that Annamalai Swami is what he's constantly emphasizing is basically Soham Bhavana, the meditation. I am. He may not put it in these words, I am he, but he says, I am consciousness, I am this, I am that. That Bhagavan has clearly said in Ulladu Narpadu, that may be an aid, but is it investigation? And Bhagavan, there are several verses in Ulladu Narpadu in which Bhagavan talks about meditating, I am he, or I am Brahman, or I am that, or whatever. Bhagavan says it's an aid, but it's not the investigation. And it may help us at a certain stage, but why to go on thinking I'm not this, I am that? Does one need to go on thinking I am a man? I am a man means I am a human being. Well, we know we're a human being. We don't have to get up every day and meditate. I am a human being. I'm a human being. As Sadhu Om used to say, if we have a doubt whether we're a donkey or a monkey, then it may be helpful to think, I am not a donkey nor a monkey. I am a human being. But it's not really necessary, unless we have such a doubt, it's not necessary for us to meditate, I'm a human being. Likewise, Bhagavan says it's not necessary for us to be thinking, I am Brahman. If we understand that we are Brahman, then we need to investigate ourselves. So Annamalai Swami was at a certain level. Bhagavan helped each devotee at their own level. When I forgot, Yogananda. There was a famous Swami called Yogananda. He went to America and he started an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship, and he wrote a book, Autobiography of a Yogi. So at one time, I don't know if they're still popular, but at one time his books were very popular, or his book or books were very popular. He came to Bhagavan in the 1930s, at the time that talks was being recorded. So this is recorded in talks. One of the questions he asked Bhagavan was, what instructions are to be given for the uplift of the masses? And Bhagavan replied, instructions cannot be given en masse. The teaching has to be according to the taught. So the different teachings are appropriate for people at different levels of spiritual development. Why are there so many religions? Why, even within Vedanta, are there so many different interpretations of Vedanta? They're all, or the core texts of Vedanta, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra, these are all Vedantins will agree, these are the core texts. But there's diametrically opposite interpretations of these texts. Why is that? Because different and that means the Upanishads give room for different interpretations. Why do we give room for different interpretation? Because different teachings are appropriate for people at different levels. So what Bhagavan may have said to Annamalai Swami or some other person may not be appropriate for everyone. Because Bhagavan, we can see this also in talks. Many of the answers that Bhagavan is recorded to are given in books like Talks and Day by Day. Some of them are may not be very well recorded, but they're his pure teachings. But many times we see Bhagavan giving answers, but are not at all in accordance with his core teachings. Why is that? Because he was giving an answer that was appropriate to the questioner. So when people say Bhagavan recommended this or recommended that, he may have recommended to certain people because that was what was beneficial for them at the level they were at. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily appropriate for all of us. So I've heard a number of people commenting about this Elam Andre, but they read it and they found it a singularly uninspiring text. In fact, even someone recently sent me something where David Godman was answering some question, and David also said he saw Elam Andre and he didn't find it inspiring. So even though he wrote Annamalai Swami's biography and recorded Annamalai Swami's whatever Annamalai Swami said, even David didn't think this Elam Andre was a particularly inspiring work.
Who actually wrote it, Michael?
I can't remember. It was someone in, I think it's a 19th century piece of Tamil prose. There's a name of the person, but it's not anyone of any significance. I mean, it's not. This person is known only because of this text, and this is almost an unknown text. But for some reason, I mean, if we have taken Annamalai Swami's word for it, for some reason Bhagavan recommended this text to him. Maybe there was something in it that Bhagavan thought would be beneficial to him. I don't know.
So then the final comment is a reflection on what you said earlier. The body and the entire world is a projection of mind and hence not self. Would this not also be true of Arunachala?
You can say that, yes, all names and forms are projections of the mind. But let's first talk about the name and form of Bhagavan. Yes, Bhagavan's name and form is a projection. But what do we see shining through that name and form? We see that great ocean of love and clarity that is our own real nature shining through Bhagavan. So Bhagavan himself says, when asked about if everything is unreal, then is the name and form of a guru also unreal? Bhagavan said, yes, certainly. But then Bhagavan gave an analogy. This analogy comes from a Tamil text called Ori Vilodikam, which was one text that Bhagavan really liked. In fact, Bhagavan once said to Murugana, this is a very nice text, but the only commentary on this is a commentary from a Shaiva Siddhanta perspective. If one of our people were to write a commentary on it, that would be very useful, because the implication was this is truly an Advaitic text, but the Shaiva Siddhantins interpreted in their way. So Bhagavan said to Murugan, if one of our people write a commentary on it, that would be very useful. Murugana took that to be a hint, but Bhagavan wanted him to write a commentary on it. And Murugana had this idea in his mind for a long time that he should write a commentary on it, but he told Sadhu Om, though that was something he always intended to do, somehow he never got round to doing it. So he said, okay, but if Bhagavan had really intended me to do it, I would have done it. But obviously, though I thought Bhagavan intended me to do it, it obviously wasn't Bhagavan's intention. But anyway, Ori Vilodikam is a nice Advaitic text, and there are many very nice teachings given there and nice similes given there. So that is a text that Bhagavan did recommend to people who were of a deeper type, and people obviously who knew Tamil, who had a good knowledge of literary Tamil, because like Bhagavan's works, it's a work it's a work of classical Tamil literature, like Bhagavan's works and Murugana's and Sadhu Om's. It's of a high literary quality. So there's an analogy given there that Bhagavan often used to refer to. That is the analogy of a lion appearing in a dream of an elephant. It is believed that elephants are not afraid of anything except lions. So if an elephant dreams of a lion, the shock of seeing a lion, the shock and fear of seeing a lion will cause the elephant to wake up. So what Bhagavan said is, though the name and form of that lion is unreal, it brings about a real awakening. Likewise, the guru is like the lion that appears in the elephant's dream. Though the name and form of the guru is unreal, it brings about the real awakening. Does that mean guru is unreal? No, it's the name and form that is unreal. The reality of guru, as Bhagavan repeatedly emphasized, the reality of guru is what is shining in our heart as eye. So long as we are looking outwards, we see Bhagavan in human name and form. We see Arunachala in the name and form of a hill. But the reality of Arunachala, the reality of Bhagavan, is what is shining in our heart as eye. So so long as our mind is going outwards, it is useful to have a name and form of God as a focus for our devotion. But we need to understand that but God is not limited to that name and form. The reality of that name and form is our own being, Atma Swarupa. So as I said earlier, Ramana Swarupa and Arunachala Swarupa is nothing but Atma Swarupa, the Swarupa, the real nature of ourself. What we actually are, that is what Arunachala actually is, that is what Bhagavan actually is.
And they say if you've got a thorn in your foot, you use another thorn to get it out.
Exactly. That is another analogy Bhagavan often used.
Did Murugana actually ever do a commentary on that? Do you know?
No, he never did. That's why he said to Sadhguru in the later years, he said, though I thought all these years, but Bhagavan was indicating that I should write a commentary on that. The fact that it never happened means that obviously wasn't Bhagavan's intention.
Even by then, yeah.
Another a friend of mine in Chennai called Sriram, he wrote a commentary on that from the perspective of Bhagavan's teachings. I think I've got a copy of his, if I remember correctly. I've got a copy of it, but I haven't read it, so I don't know how good it is. But he's a devotee of Bhagavan, and I think he was quite close to Kanakamal in her later years. And I think she encouraged him to do so. So there is a commentary written by a devotee of Bhagavan. I can't say how good it is, but at least he's made a good attempt at it.
So yeah, I think we're done now. That was more than a 3-hour stint.
Okay, yeah, well, that is also what is destined to happen.
But your strength, that means your strength is up.
Yes, I may feel very tired after it, but what is to happen, as Bhagavan said, what is to happen is to happen. We can't avoid it. And what is not to happen will not happen, how much we try. So let's leave it all to him. Sometimes, I mean, a few months ago, I would have been really tired talking so long. Now things aren't so bad. So today this is what was destined to happen, so that's fine.